Hello, and welcome back to another episode of RealityQuest. This week is unique because we are actually recording from a local business here in Seattle. We're trying to support Cafe Ladro in light of recent events with coronavirus and all of the crazy insanity that's been going on here and around the world. So
Jay and I went on an expedition this morning to a bunch of places trying to decide where we would record to prove that Seattle was still alive.
Everybody's still kicking over
We
here.
went to KEXP, and then we thought, well, this is kind of weird. We might get in trouble for the music that they're playing in the background because that's a popular Seattle spot, but it's actually a radio station.
Yeah.
And then we went to a few other places, and it was just like kind of Goldilocks-y. It was either too loud, too quiet. There weren't plugs where we could plug in. And so, but we can confirm that there are people out there and people are out in the shops and enjoying life.
I felt like we just needed to get in touch a little bit with the local area a bit, just because of everything that's been happening. So
yeah, on a serious note, it's definitely, obviously, this has been a big problem in Seattle, the coronavirus fight. And there
it's now
is
becoming a big one everywhere else in the U.S.
Yeah, and it's definitely impacting our local shops, the service industry. I've been visiting some restaurants and talking with the people who work there, and places like the International District for lots of obvious reasons, which are a big problem.
Right.
And so if you are at low risk, I know that they're trying to encourage social distancing, but if you can find a way to go out and support local business, or even if you can talk to them and find a way just to help them. I mean, somebody the other day I saw they were dropping off, it was Grand Central Bakery, that's a spot in Seattle, and they provide bread to, it was Cafe Press, and I was there, and they had somebody from that shop stopped off and gave them extra pastries for everyone there. So there's lots of different ways you can support, even if that's not putting yourself at risk. And so we highly encourage that, and that's what we're trying to showcase right now.
Yeah.
Plus, it's not too bad. You get to enjoy some coffee. Yesterday, I did my civil duty and ate some donuts at General Porpoise.
Yeah, get out of the house for a little bit. Everyone's been going stir crazy.
Right.
But I think for me, it's key that going to visit these places locally, but not going to go and visit my grandparents right afterwards.
Yes. Good point.
Yeah, because, we want to protect one another and really just keep everyone as healthy as possible and really slow down the growth of this whole outbreak. So.
Right, especially for the hospitals, because I think they're being hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
And actually, the other night I couldn't sleep because I was thinking about how I keep hearing firsthand that hospitals are running out of supplies. So there are people I know who work in ERs, and there's just various people I'm friends with, or I have know through somebody else, who are firsthand experiencing from working in the local hospitals what is going on. And it ain't pretty.
It ain't pretty.
So this is horrifying, but they're already running out of hand sanitizers. Masks, right. And so there's lots of different reasons why this is happening. A large reason, probably the biggest reason is actually not the hoarding. It's that they can't get the shipping from where they get these supplies.
Yeah, I mean, hospitals and our whole medical infrastructure is basically always operating around 95% capacity, just from the normal influx of different kinds of problems that they have to deal with. So something like this, an outbreak, really strains it to the breaking point pretty quickly. Yeah.
And I think what doesn't help is that then they're not used to having this, or they're not ready to have this problem of no shipping to them for the supplies. And then if they're running out, well, then they might go to local stores to get supplies because they're not getting the shippings. And then all the local stores are out because of people going crazy and thinking it's the apocalypse. So just to be clear, and lots of my mom is a nurse practitioner, my sister is a nurse practitioner, I have friends. So masks are in limited supply, and those masks should be given to the people who need it most. The people who need it most are the people working in hospitals and medical facilities who are going face to face with people who are sick. Because it will be protecting, the virus is spread through little droplets from sneezing or coughing. And so if you're an individual who's just walking around trying to protect yourself in the open air, I mean, really that's honestly just stupid.
Helping you at all.
Right. It's not, I don't want to say it's stupid. I did. Can't take it back now.
It's out
Moving
there.
on.
No, I mean, well, it is not. It's not helping you, and it's not helping the other people that actually need them far more.
Right.
Really, that's the point. Is the priority should be around people that are taking care of others who are at risk population.
Right.
For the outbreak.
And this is, somebody said the other day that this is good practice for an actual apocalyptic problem. And it's true. It's showing us, how do you communicate with your community? How do you work together? Or do you just end up going to the store and buying everything off the shelves and not thinking about what you can do to help local hospitals or to help other areas in need? Yeah. And so the point is, obviously, so it's funny because I talked with my mom and my sister, and my mom totally shut me down on this, but whatever, I'll explain. So I thought I couldn't sleep one night, and I thought, I've been watching the Hillary Clinton documentary on Hulu also recently, which just really inspired me because it's like anytime you're watching somebody who actually steps up and tries to help their community in some way or tries to stand up for a cause, and somebody who's worked in that their whole life, after watching that and hearing all these things about the hospitals, I'm like, what am I going to do? Just stand here and not do anything? Right. So I thought, well, there's got to be a way, like Microsoft and Amazon, all these big companies, they sent everyone home. Mm-hmm. They must have hand sanitizer in their buildings everywhere, right? Yeah. And so couldn't we somehow collect a bunch of hand sanitizers? I know that it's not going to make a dent because what these hospitals need is a lot more, right. But I don't know, do we then not do anything because of that? Or could we help one hospital, one day, one person by doing a drive to collect hand sanitizers and any masks that people have access to, or anything like that? I mean, isn't there anything we can do? And so then I went on Twitter, which everyone who listens knows I'm working on my social media presence. And so I tried to create a Google sheet where people could list what they knew about which hospitals were actually in need. Okay. So you could just list, I know that this hospital said they ran out, because some are going to be more impacted than others. Right. This is what they need. Is it hand sanitizer? Is it masks? Is it something else I'm not aware of? And then have a contact there. And then you understand who's in need of what supplies. Then the next step is, who has access to supplies? Can we work with these bigger companies? Can we find individuals who are willing to donate the same you would? Can they step back and realize, hey, I probably don't need these plastic gloves or these masks. I freaked out and I bought them. Right. Or they know someone. I don't know. Is there any way we can work together?
Somehow make it apparent to people, give them a conduit or a way to actually rethink what they stocked up on, and if they have extra that they can spare for
I'm sure that a lot of people didn't know when they were stocking up that they were literally, that there would be a problem with hospitals not having it. People aren't thinking that way.
This whole situation is unprecedented for basically most people that are alive right now. I don't know that there is really any population that's still around that has gone through a major pandemic, at least in the American populace. There have been outbreaks in other parts of the world, of course, and there's been the threat of outbreaks here in past decades. But there really hasn't been anything on this kind of scale in the United States for this long. So people, the only thing they know how to deal with is a hurricane or an earthquake, and that kind of short-term disaster preparedness where the infrastructure fundamentally goes down for a little bit.
Right.
And you're like, I'm going to go stock up on toilet paper, and I'm going to go get as much pallets of water and whatever as possible, because I'm going to outlast this situation, because it'll only be maybe a couple weeks at worst, maybe something like Katrina where out for months, there is a situation. But usually it's something that is much shorter term. And so people reacted to this in the same way that they react to a hurricane coming into town. And it's not the same at all in the way that it actually goes through a population. It's not a short term. It'll hit, and then in a week or two, it's gone, and you can just live off your supplies at home. So it's that kind of reaction just is not necessarily the best way to go about it. But we also there's no precedence for people to behaving the other way.
People don't know what to do. And they don't know what to expect. And it is, I will say, when you go into the grocery stores and things are out of stock, it makes you panic whether or not
you're like,
even
oh God, I need to go stock up.
Exactly. There is something in our little human lizard brains.
Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on this?
What?
Pyramid.
The Maslow's hierarchy.
Of needs. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So I was in the grocery store. I was in Trader Joe's, and things are going out of stock. This was, I think, last week, and I panic, but I panic in the weirdest way. So I got about 7 different types of dip, okay? And it's like...
You're like, I need all the guacamole.
I need all the dips. I need this type of hummus. I need that type of hummus. I need the chocolate hummus. I got every type of dip.
Chocolate hummus?
There's chocolate hummus.
That
is
sounds...
a thing. You can... It sounds gross, but it's actually good. You could like dip strawberries in it, and it's probably better for you, but it has that kind
I'm
of
skeptical,
desserty.
but I'll try
We'll try it.
Yeah.
So I got everything. And of course that makes no sense. It's not non-perishable. So I just had like a total panic attack in a weird way. But yeah, I get it. I mean, I'm not blaming anyone in one direction or the other. I think it makes sense why people are afraid and they're panicking. I think that, but all of this to say, I think that there are ways we should try and help or at least communicate about it.
Yeah.
So now my mom was all like shutting me down and
What?
sorry, Mom. But she did. I got so mad.
give her
I was
shit
like, I
on
just
the-
want to be like Hillary Clinton. She was like, Kelly, sorry, but like just stop freaking out. Just wait a couple weeks. Like,
Right.
you know, shipments will come in and
Things will catch up.
Things will catch up. Granted,
not-
she's on the East Coast, okay? She
True.
is on the East
It
Coast.
hasn't hit that hard
It hasn't
yet.
hit that hard yet. So, and she's also trained. That's just her personality.
Right.
But I'm still like, I am curious about if there are ways to help. And so if anybody's interested in that effort, I
look
will
on
keep
Twitter.
it going.
Yeah.
And you can go to on my Twitter, it's FireLady at FireLady Forever. And I made a post, a thread, if you will, my first thread, and just talking about that. And I created that spreadsheet. I'm sure nobody's entered anything yet, but you know what? I'm going to keep it open.
Whatever.
If somebody goes there, you know, we could get one hand sanitizer for one ER. And you know what? Little by little, we'll all make a difference
You got
together.
to start somewhere. I think that's the
Exactly.
point.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to, you know, stay positive about that stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
you know,
Jay.
I think we've figured out we are going to be breaking this episode into 2 parts.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
Right. So
More for optics than anything
yeah,
else.
it really is. So
We're
that it's not just an
if we
intimidating.
put like a 4-hour episode, will people just get sticker shock?
People are just going to be like morally offended if they
Yeah,
look.
they're like, I could listen to a whole audiobook, but if we split it into 2, it's kind of like that pricing
it's
at
2 episodes
99
for the price of
cents.
1, yeah.
You guys won't even know that we're doing it to
It's
you.
discount. Yeah, half off. You're getting 2 episodes for the price of 1.
Oh, but so this episode, Jay and I,
It's unique.
Yeah, it is
Very
unique because this is the first and only time so far that we have had 2 guests on. And 2 guests who didn't previously know each other. So it's not like a duo who work together. We decided to just experiment with the idea of bringing 2 separate people on together and see what that conversation could turn into.
Yeah, we'd been talking about this for months and kind of thinking about how could we go about it? Like, how would we still kind of keep things reined in and have some sort of direction to the conversation? But it was an interesting experiment, and I think we're going to do more of this too. We should probably introduce the 2 of them,
Yeah.
right?
So one of our guests is Miko Charbonneau. So she is primarily a game designer, though she wears many hats. She's also a producer. She's a writer. She does so many things, but primarily a game designer. And she, like many others on our show, was part of the HoloLens team. I feel like we just have a bunch of...
Yeah, we've been
I
really
think,
making rounds there.
It's because HoloLens... It makes sense that that was one of the biggest initial XR projects, and so
developments, yeah.
all of the people who are going to be leaders or movers and shakers in this industry are going to have come from something like
At
a
some point, they
project.
intersected
there's going to
with
be
that
like
particular group.
all of this.
Yeah.
It's like the birth of the origin story of XR.
It's either that or they came from like the Oculus side of things.
Right.
Early days too.
Totally. So she was on the HoloLens team, and she also later worked on Minecraft for Microsoft. And she's currently a game designer at VR game company Drifter. And they also recently came out with a new VR game. So we'll talk more about that in the outro.
Yep.
And on top of that, and many other things, I mean, Jay already mentioned that she has a Twitch stream where she both does UX design, like she works in Unity, she works in Unreal, and she also does some random cooking on there.
Yeah.
But she also runs her own game studio, which is called Pretty Smart Games. And again, we'll give you all the info in the outro and also links on our website. But just in general, she's a super powerful storyteller. She really creates especially her own games from Pretty Smart. They are games of very deep meaning. And she'll get into some of that.
Deep feels.
Deep feels for sure. And personally, she's inspired me a lot to create meaningful experiences. And because she has such an interesting background and story where she was kind of discouraged along the way to get into games, and she's definitely takes a very different approach in her her mix of storytelling in games. She just, through everything she's done in her history and how far she's made it, she's personally inspired me to find my own unique voice in the game industry, and I think a lot of people should be interested in following her and what she does. She's already done some great things, and I think she's just going to continue to blow people's minds and really just blaze a new path in the game / storytelling / XR industry.
So the other guest that we brought on was Mike Hines. He's currently the art director for Oculus, which is now...
Art lead.
Art lead.
You said art director.
Oh gosh. I literally have it written down and I read it incorrectly. He's the art lead at Oculus.
Mike.
So I want to quote him directly because I really liked this. He's basically, the way that he describes what he does is, my own work focuses on philosophical and sociological themes with a common thread of humanity's relationship with nature. I would consider this to be very true given the art of his that I've seen at his own house, and just all of the different things that he tends to value and dig into. And his personality. He also has a personal game studio, which is Sparklight Studios. He was a technical art director at Harebrained Schemes prior to being at Oculus. They've made some really interesting games in the past, a couple of which I've actually enjoyed myself. Battletech was one, Shadowrun, which is a whole series of different games over the years, and then Necropolis. That game had a couple different iterations that came out on Steam. It's PC focused, but it's like a weird sort of multi-level procedurally generated dungeon crawler kind of thing. You can also find his art on Imprint Sachiart, I think, and then Tumblr as well under Mike Hines. So if you want to look up any of the work that he's done. In general, Mike is just a really active sort of community volunteer. He does a lot he makes a lot of efforts to sort of bring people together from diverse backgrounds and really encourage them to open up their sort of creative energies and discover the sort of inner artist that we all might have if only we were to allow it to come out. But Mike is amazing. Become really good friends with him thus far. Ever since we recorded this episode many months ago. So.
And actually, speaking of that being many months ago, it's crazy to think. So Jay and I, as we mentioned before, we did a bunch of recordings at the onset of when we started this.
And we bulked them up at the very beginning.
Right, and now we've like slowly been releasing them.
Oh, God.
And it's crazy to think that this recording happened right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah. That's literally 6 months ago now.
Yeah. So we're actually...
We're coming up on it.
We're coming up on... This is, I think, the last of all of our bulk episodes recorded.
Yeah.
And so we'll be doing a Thoughts on Thoughts next, meaning after we release these two, in like 2 weeks, we'll do a Thoughts on Thoughts and talk about some upcoming things, and we're going to be getting some fresh recordings. But
everything going forward is going to be more present now. It's
right.
like the Kelly and Jay's brains that have developed over time through all of these conversations, and our sort of views and the way we talk about things has changed and become more refined in this domain. And so we can stop worrying about all these old conversations that we were having at the beginning. They're all amazing in their own right, but it is, as a creator of this content, it's always a weird feeling to jump back in time,
right,
and dig back through an old conversation that you've then hashed out all those different ideas and talked about them and developed them more in your mind.
Yeah, I think it's just that it's not that anything grows stale. It's that you and I feel like we've learned so much since then.
It's not stale to anybody else.
That the conversation right now with them might be slightly different. But what's interesting about this episode is in our last Thoughts on Thoughts, we started getting into the use of describing VR as empathetic, and we get into that in this episode.
Right.
So it's like this weird like jump backwards, but also somehow it ends up like
it was very
by total
to...
accident or coincidence. It happens to be talking about some recent themes that we were trying to talk through together.
Right. I think it'll actually be really useful to have started that topic in the previous Thoughts on Thoughts, then introduce everything that came up in this set of conversations with Miko and Mike, and then reflect on that in the next episode that we do.
Yes.
Because it will be coming full circle.
Yes.
And then taking everything forward with us. So I am really looking forward to that.
This episode is fun. It's inspiring. It's educational.
It's a milestone for us as well.
Yeah, because of that experiment. And we're really excited for you guys to listen. So enjoy the episode, and we'll catch you on the other end. There's a show called Evil. It's on TV, right? Okay.
It's really good, actually.
There is a AR moment in that, and my mom explained it to me, and I was like, "There's no way that's what's in the TV show," but it was. So.
It is
really.
You know what I'm talking about,
whole
right?
Sequence on AR
with
stuff.
the 4 girls
What? The kids are playing an AR game, and it turns into this creepy, demonic, weird stuff.
It's wild.
Jeez.
But it actually is not a bad representation. It's just more advanced.
That's what I was gonna say. It's more advanced than than what is possible right now.
But it is conceptually what people want to do.
But here,
Can you try to describe like what was happening?
It's like it's a horror like. I feel like I can't explain what without explaining my mom and how boring she can make anything sound, which is like an ongoing thing.
No offense, Mom.
Yeah, no, she knows. She knows. But basically, there's 4 daughters.
Okay.
The thing I couldn't get over is that their dad is supposedly a guide on Mount Everest, and that's why he's not there. And I was like, no, go back to that part. I don't understand.
I thought that was going to be a weird subplot that wasn't real. I thought it was going to be like somebody, everyone's imagining it or something.
I'm honestly not caught up, but I'm probably going to keep watching to find out if the dad is really
if he
Mount
ever
Everest.
comes back from Mount Everest.
But basically, they get the headsets and they accidentally play a horror game. But hearing my mom try to explain the AR that she saw in this like mainstream television
there were spiders.
show. There was a zombie. There's spiders. There was a Ouija board.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Honestly, the problem is it's like everything where they try to make it into something that's even scarier than it actually can be.
Yeah.
Where they turn it into something that's outside and supernatural and those kind of things.
I don't know, man. We were just reading an article. Jay, you shared this one with me of this guy who I'm hoping in this current moment that I'm not repeating something I already said on a different episode. I'm like having that deja vu, but whatever.
Yeah,
There's this episode. There's this. This is where. The one Jake thing did not work out. So there's this article that was talking about this guy who worked on paranormal AR game experience. And I mean, bottom line is he fucked his own head up so much by how much he scared himself in having to test his own game.
Well, he was really obsessed with crafting this sort of game experience that was just full immersion, and he took every single opportunity to take advantage of like the phone because it was a mobile based game, and the fact that you have a flashlight on the front and a camera that you can use. So he forced the person to put on earbuds or headphones of some sort so that you have like a full audible sort of scene around you. And take advantage of the stereo, like pan on that. And then he also made you use the flashlight on the front of your phone and had you turn off the lights. You could not play the game without doing that. So that then you were experiencing the game with these photos, like real photos that are imposed onto the environment in front of you in the dark. And you're just able to see where your light.
That's really clever.
Yeah. That's actually similar to what they're doing in that show, too. That's one of the first things they put it on, and they're like, turn off the lights. Go down the hall.
Yeah.
Like they map it onto the environment.
And then you're holding a camcorder trying to explore this haunted house, essentially.
Right. Yeah. But this guy made himself literally sick. He got hospitalized because of this experience.
Well, because he was having to develop it for like months and months.
Right, and test, And he wanted it to be super realistic.
Yeah.
Which went into the valley beyond the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
Which is just like you can make it so realistic that it's too real. And then what can that do with our brains?
It was I think the article title was "There is a valley beyond there is a second uncanny valley beyond the first," and it's that basically you craft an experience that is so convincing and compelling that you can't voluntarily or intentionally convince yourself it's not real.
Yeah.
Or at least you can't stop yourself from being scared and reacting
and internally reacting to it in particular.
Right.
Yeah.
That actually is one of my concerns with VR in general is like it is so easy to produce such a strong emotion.
Yeah.
And we're if we use all the same tools that we've had in screens, then we are going to do things that are way too intense. And unfortunately,
some of the very first things we've done are roller coasters.
Yeah,
haunted
exactly.
houses.
How
Or like
we
walking
make
on a
it
plank
cool?
off of a building.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
literally just going to bring up a roller coaster experience. So I was at a conference in LA and they had those platforms where you can kind of rock up and down and side to side so you can feel like you're on a roller coaster while you're watching the experience. And I put that headset on. It's like, I'm in the industry. I'm familiar with what it can do to your brain. I understand like what I'm getting myself
doesn't
into.
matter.
It does
No.
not matter. I put that thing on. The person who was like monitoring the experience, these like volunteer low paid hosts, I'm sure, who are just like don't realize what they're about to get themselves into with putting me in this experience. And Mike was standing there, not you, Mike, my Mike.
Other
And
Mike.
like I rocked down and they bring you up on this super tall. Of course, they make the roller coaster taller than you would probably ever have in real life because they can.
'Cause why not?
Yeah. And then I
for the hell of
started
it.
going down and literally just like started screaming my brains out in the middle of this conference. And Mike said that the look on my face was such pure fear that the woman running the thing was like, oh my God, like she didn't know what to do. And I couldn't get out of my head to just be like, just close your eyes. Just close your eyes. And I just ended up ripping the headset off and like throwing it across the room.
That sounds very similar to the video you posted where you're playing the horror game.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Same
Oh, the
exact thing.
elevator
You
game,
crawl
right?
on the ground and
elevator
like grab
ritual.
Yeah.
Mike's leg.
Yeah.
That's a really good point that you bring up, Miko, about the fact that we've gotten used to all of these patterns developing for regular video games, at least any medium that is framed. So there's a limit to the amount of your perception that it can kind of take hold of. And we're using those same more potent and kind of condensed methods and then just ported them directly into a fully immersive environment. And that is very risky.
Yeah, I think that I want people to really care a lot about what they put out there when we're talking about the whole XR experience.
Yeah.
But of course, there's not like a police force that's going to come get you and be like, you
XR
made your
police.
horror game too intense and 5-year-olds are playing it. Like there's,
Maybe there should be, though.
I mean, there are the comfort ratings and things like that, but it's just not nearly as elaborate as it should be considering
Would
what
these
there
be
is
like
to it.
the VR troopers?
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
That's our
from
next-
the EV
Oh, I
episode.
get
last-
it now.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
Like, what are
Come
you
on, Kelly,
talking
come
about?
on. I know. I'm the guest.
Well, I knew it was a reference to an earlier episode. I just wasn't connecting the dots. I was like, what about them?
They're already real in your mind.
Yeah. We just need the VR troopers to come and police content for VR.
Yeah. I wonder with the ratings for movies and all of that, like, did they go through the same thing where they had to be like, what if somebody makes a horror film that's too scary for people? And like, what is the control around that? Is it just like social taste where people don't, because people could make scarier things.
Yeah.
And they probably do, actually. I don't watch.
People
I don't
definitely
watch-
do make a
Yeah,
variety.
I don't watch a lot of horror. So
I
that's-
watch a lot of horror.
Oh,
Okay.
well.
I actually
love
don't
to
know much
hear.
of ratings, but I always kind of assumed it was very political.
It was extremely
It
political.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very like Hollywood money driven as well. Just the
The
kind of
history of it.
content. It's shifted a lot too over time. I mean, like even back in like the 80s, I remember I wasn't alive in the 80s, but I remember seeing movies that
Ouch.
came out during the time.
All right. Let's continue.
Moving on from that. No, just kidding.
I remember some very specific examples of movies where there was particular content in there that is no longer acceptable for like PG-13.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas there are other aspects of content that have become more prevalent at different levels, like violence versus nudity. I think some nudity was a little bit more acceptable in PG-13 back then, but not as much violence. And today, I think violence has kind of shifted to allow a little bit more flexibility.
Because we're a totally backward society.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, none of that sex stuff, but you can have all the violence you want. That's fine.
Yeah, for sure.
Why do we have problems, I wonder?
Right.
I think there's been more than a few horror movie marketing campaigns that have been like too scary to be rated, or like people are passing out in the
Whoa.
in the
They like to promote it that
auditorium.
way.
Yeah.
Oh.
And and
like
you
for
know,
the appeal.
Yes.
Yeah, that might just be like one accidentally epileptic shot, you know, but they'll say it as if like, old ladies are just falling down in the aisles, you know.
Yeah, that's a selling point, though. They're using it as a marketing tool. Yeah.
And I think there definitely are like, I think with horror, there's like everybody kind of has their things that they are too far for them, even if you like. Even if you like the idea,
Getting
you might
pushed to the edge a little bit.
Yeah, there may be things where like you have a line you can't cross, right? Like I used to like body horror torture stuff more when I was younger.
Yeah, but then you get to a point where you're like, wait, there's some really uncool stuff here.
And that point was Human Centipede.
Oh yeah,
right? When that movie
that does
came
it for
out, I
pretty
was
much
like,
anyone. I didn't watch it because I knew what it was. I didn't watch it.
Yeah, I didn't watch it. You know,
I accidentally watched it.
Oh, nice.
Oh no!
Hanging out of the party.
That was not.
Yeah, I would never watch that.
So there's definitely movies that like really extreme horror fans consider to be like, oh, like if you haven't seen like Martyrs and stuff, then you don't really know like what is really intense. But I think that's really a personal choice everybody has to make.
Yeah. But in the case of movies, somebody is choosing whether or not to release something, right? Because if it's going through a typical production company, they're aligning it with their brand, and then they have to go through getting it actually accepted into theaters or getting it accepted into festivals and promoted that way. I mean, now we have obviously like web series or direct online, so I guess people don't need to do it that way. But even then, you might be going through like, I guess in that case, it just comes down to like what your fans like.
Right.
But I guess it is an interesting concept where like with games, it doesn't really go through that process, right? Like historically with games, you just like end up getting it approved. But
there is a rating. Yeah, you know, there's the whole rating system for the I can't remember the name of it now, but there's a rating system for games. It's similar to movies. ESRB.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and then different
electronic something rating board
for mature.
Different stores, like if you're a mobile game and you're putting in like the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, they'll have guidelines. Especially, it's about like if you think children are going to play. Yeah, there's been a lot of updates in that regard. So they'll ask you to update all your apps or all your games and say like, are you marketing this to children? And if so, there's more rigorous things you have to go through. Okay, but I think it's still like if you're publishing it yourself, then you decide that,
you
right?
Can do whatever you want.
And I think for a game, they're so much longer. Yeah. In a movie, theoretically, somebody could take a couple hours, but is everyone going to spend 80 hours
like reviewing
like you can't spend weeks or months at a time spending hours and hours in that world.
Yeah.
Like you mean for approving. Yeah. Like
approving it, experiencing it as well.
Putting an Easter egg in, putting in something on a secret path.
Very true.
Could be very common.
Yeah. Well, there was that story of the VR game where it brought you through a school shooting. Does anyone remember this?
It was pretty recent. They basically made a game that was about a school shooting, but
you had to shoot the children.
I don't know what the actual game experience was. I know that it very quickly got called out, and there was a lot of brouhaha about it. And I think it got pulled from the stores that it was on.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is I don't actually remember what happened with it. I knew there was a lot of brouhaha about it, but now I'm curious what actually happened with it, because that makes me think of like, okay, what is the process for those types of things? There's obviously something there.
Like all of the marketplaces are all products in themselves. Yep. Like they care about their public image and their press.
They have bounds beyond which.
Ultimately, if they get enough pressure from any source, they're going to end up just dropping you from their store, and then it's just hard for people to get access to your product. So that is a control mechanism to a degree. But there's not a lot of things right now for evaluating the experience, the different types of ways that those experiences, the VR experiences, can be bad. Like there's all kinds of different abuse scenarios and all kinds of different ways they can be uncomfortable. They can be physically uncomfortable. They can be psychologically uncomfortable.
There's
so there's just
social
nothing
norms
close
that can
to rating that right now.
Yeah. There's like social norms that can be broken very easily as well.
And that kind of reminds me of like one of my favorite topics about VR, which is like games or experiences that promote empathy. And I think that's in this case, it seems like a pretty clear and cut situation, but I'm not sure it always would be. I think that like I saw 2 recent ones in the Quest store. I played the Anne Frank experience, which I really enjoyed. And I haven't played Traveling While Black yet, but I noticed that has very divisive reviews.
Yes.
And I was curious if there have been experiences that I know, I'm sure many people in this XR space are talking about how can we promote empathy, and I've definitely had those conversations with people. And I think it's kind of hairy to how do you do it without it feeling like you're going to school, sort of?
Yeah,
like
here's a lecture.
Here's a lecture on how to be
Training.
more less sexist or less racist.
Or like anti-bias training in the classroom or whatever. There's lots of examples like that.
Did you ever play the Notes on Blindness? Have you tried that one?
I did a little bit, yeah.
That one's more of like, they just made an experience. It's not really explicitly trying to tell you a whole lot, but it's just a kind of process. And
you kind of interpret what you will from the experience.
Yeah.
For anyone who's not familiar with Notes on Blindness, it's basically this experience that like you are sitting on a bench. So, well, actually, I'll go back to the context where it was built from these notes, I think from a voice recorder, right, from a man who was losing his sight.
Yep.
Yes.
And they took those recordings and added an experience in VR to it.
Which basically it's use audio in a way that feels visual, or they use visual cues that kind of are supposed to signify that you've got all these audio spatial signals and things like that. And
it's trying to evoke some sort of similar experience.
And particularly if you watch all the way to the end, like the end experience is very kind of cathartic and just feels really very emotional.
Yeah, and it'll be like, like you were saying with the spatial sound, it'll say like he, is hearing, he's describing what he's hearing. And then you're starting to see what you would imagine his quote unquote like visual or visualization is, which is like
echolocation type mentality.
Yeah, and there's like colors and movement, and there are shapes because he previously saw stuff, which on a side note made me curious about like what would this look like if you had never seen anything?
Right.
Yeah,
much more complicated problem.
Yeah.
I believe there's still unless that part of your brain is impaired, and that's why you're losing your blindness, there's still a sort of visual system that manifests things. Just like if you close your eyes and you can't see anything, you still see like weird flashes of color and shapes and things that aren't actually there.
Right, but in that product, they actually show like people walking around. Whereas if you've never seen a person walking around, you have no idea what that looks like. And so then you're going to interpret it as some other thing.
Yeah, it's like a synesthesia case where like what does auditory input for your senses turn into on the visuals?
But that stuff's amazing for VR though, because you can do all kinds of crazy experimental conversions of different senses, and there's so much amazing research going into audio spatialization for VR that
there was an experience called I'm forgetting it, but it's based off of a short film, and it begins with a D, I think. But it's about this police officer who takes a call, and I don't want to give anything away, and obviously we'll figure out what the name was, but it's all about Dispatch. It's called Dispatch. And it does a similar thing as Notes of Blindness, where it's like you are the police officer taking a call, and you're trying to figure out what's happening based on what this person is describing to you. And it just is like using it. Obviously, your idea starts with darkness because he has no idea what's going on. Then they start to, it's like a scary scenario where this young woman is afraid of somebody and they're chasing her. And then as she's describing things and as he's asking her questions, his visual and the world that he's starting to build of this story are building up around you. Anyways, I think that type of approach to designing in VR is fascinating. And going back to the empathy, it is a way to show, at least in those two cases, how somebody's thoughts are developing over time and the visual that's being created for them. But Miko, back to your point about like how do you balance it though? I created this experience. Well, you did it for the Wing Luke Museum.
Yeah, have you talked about it before on the podcast?
No. I don't think so.
You haven't shouted out your own awesome
crazy.
Experience on your
Way to
podcast?
be the best example of not self-promoting. Interesting.
That's correct.
This is the problem with all artists everywhere.
I know.
I'm so glad I was here today. All right, tell us more.
Well, so I mean the short just kidding, I can never do short descriptions. I always say the short description, then I go for like 3 hours.
An hour later.
I mean, it was an adaptation of a short story where in the short story, these aliens land, they're escaping a genocide in a different planet, and they land on like our soil on Earth, and it all takes place on this like kind of resorty beach area where people are vacationing, and they approach the people there and are looking for help, and they're like, we're escaping a genocide, like we come in peace, essentially, all of this stuff. And that short story is all about how we would react to aliens landing in that situation. Because a lot of alien stories are typically about kind of like aliens coming to take over.
There's some sort of threat.
Right. And in this case, it's like very clear that they are escaping a problem that they're having. And how would we react trying to integrate them into the communities and the schools, and how would we dole out stuff for them?
Yeah.
And it talks about how people react. Like, I mean, obviously there's some really, it's a pretty dystopian view, and it highlights things like, well, people would be concerned about us just handing out houses to them, like, well, we're the ones who work here, we're the ones, it's almost like who deserves what.
Yeah, like
right?
there's still humans that need things, like why are you giving it to these
why are we
people?
giving
the
them
refugee
this, or,
story.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And
they're not us, so why do they get things?
And it was very blatantly about refugee, because it was written in like 2017. Not that there's any really time where it hasn't applied, but there was a lot going on, in 2017 with like the Syrian refugee crisis,
which
and all that
has been going on since like 2011,
right,
essentially, when the whole the Arab Spring happened, and you had all of these different nations throughout the Middle East that kind of rebelled against their sort of leaders, and a lot of turmoil that happened during that time.
Yeah.
And
It's just
natural disasters and all kinds of stuff. It's been very long going.
There's a convergence of a lot of things.
Right. And when I was writing the adaptation, I had really interesting conversations with the original author, with like, okay, we have like no budget, we have one animator, and we have 2 months, and so it was like
reality.
What right? So what do we do with this? How do we boil this down into literally its simplest form? Which is hard because it's hard obviously because like if you want to highlight something like the bystander effect, well, you need people there. But anyways, she did want to highlight the bystander effect, and more so when we thought about, well, whose perspective should this story be told through? Because the original story was, I forget the actual form it's called, but it's like a we mentality. It's like the plural. It's like first person plural.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So it's kind of like, okay, but if you are a character, or is it like, you have to make these decisions when you're building an experience in VR. Are you a character?
Because you are you,
what perspective do you have in the story?
Right, and obviously you have to do that with any story, with any game, with any book or whatever. But it is a decision you need to make, and that's not always clear, right? Especially in adaptations. And we were trying to figure out too, like, okay, I thought, well, maybe we do it from the aliens' perspective, because I don't know, I'm simple-minded, and I was like, that would be pretty interesting, like what they're going through with this whole thing, and just like make people sad, But the author was like, no, I want this to be from the perspective of the person who closes the blinds to what's going on. And that was like a part of the story where when these aliens are essentially, so not to like ruin the short story, and by the way, this is called, the original story is called The Wretched and the Beautiful, and you can look it up online, we'll probably link it or whatever, and it's by a local to Seattle award-winning author, Lily Yu. She goes by Lily Yu as an author. And so to give away the ending, the aliens who are doing the genociding, doing the genocide,
suffering from a genocide,
the genocide.
going through a
they're leading
the ones that are doing
That's what I'm
the ones
saying.
that are killing
they're
others.
doing
Gotcha.
it,
Yeah.
I couldn't have said it any clearer. So they land. So you have this whole beginning of the story where everyone's like, they land, and then the middle is like, well, what do we do? And it's all like the community forming around it, and how people are reacting, and then they're struggling, and then the other aliens who are leading the genocide come down, like they followed them, and they're like, we're
Where
sorry,
did they go?
these
Like nothing to see here.
Where are they? We're trying to take them out.
Well, they're like, oh, we had our these aliens or whatever escape from confinement, and we're here to take them back and put them in confinement. We're here to take them off your hands. There's also a visual element where the ones who are leading the genocide are very like beautiful. They're the beautiful and the beautiful and the wretched. And the ones that are escaping the genocide are very are basically ugly creatures, essentially, what we would call that. Right.
In
Yeah.
various
Wretched
manners.
creatures. Yeah. And anyway, so we had to figure out what to do. And the author wanted the perspective of these people who close the blinds. So when these aliens are being taken away back to the genocide planet, people didn't know what to do, so they just kind of closed their blinds and were like, and then woke up the next morning and everything was gone and back to normal.
Yep.
Right. And this was a really
Forces
interesting...
you into that action, effectively.
Exactly. Yeah. And this was a really interesting time, at least for me, because Trump had just been elected, like, I guess this was 2 years ago. Yeah. So it's like a year into the Trump administration, essentially.
Okay.
And on top of that, which, like, I don't mean to get into politics, but, like, I just will flat out say I don't like him. And
I don't mean to
Probably
get into
shared.
politics. But here we are.
But yeah. But also, like, everything else going on in the world, it was like I had this mentality along with a lot of my friends, which was like, I can't even read the news anymore. And you started hearing this from a lot of people after Trump got elected. Like, I'm just turning off the
You had an
news.
emotional,
Yeah.
exactly, an
Right.
emotional fatigue.
It becomes
Yeah.
exhausting to be exposed to that constant sort of tension back
Right.
and forth between sides.
Yes.
Parties.
And so that struck me, and I had some really hard, internal conversations as well as conversations with Lily, the author, about, well, okay, but what do we do? Because, like, this whole story was really pessimistic, but it's like, well, what are we supposed to do? Like how
what is
can
the
I
action you
can't
take?
change anything, Anyways, so we ended up creating it from that perspective, and we had to simplify it. So it was like the way we did that was we had in VR, is you are a human sitting on the beach, and you're at the beach at night, and there's like a resort and all of this stuff. So you kind of get the sense that people are around without having more characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Because also we were doing this on Oculus Goes, which
Yeah.
because we had to have it in a museum that people could easily get into and out of, and we had to have those donated. So the poly count, which it means like essentially, how many
The
polygons
complexity
you're
of it.
allowed, had
It's
to also be
less-
low.
Less computing power is needed to run.
Right. Yeah. So limited in many ways on the amount of characters we could have. And then, so we did it so that this one, like the ship lands, an alien approaches you on the beach and starts asking you for help. And your interaction with them, your dialogue is essentially set. Like, they say something to you and then you respond and select, like, you don't have any options. You have to select what is presented to you.
Yeah, none of your options are good.
Right.
Or
and
at least from
only-
the concerned person's mentality. or
Right.
the
And
empathetic
but
person's
actually
mentality.
none of it was, I wouldn't even say any of it was really bad.
Right.
It was this mentality of like, I'm really sorry, like, I'm just here on vacation. You go ask somebody else, essentially. Like, I'm not the right person to go to. And it's this kind of ongoing experience where you're saying these things that is dismissing this alien, but not in a really mean way. And like a good, a well-meaning person would actually say those things or feel that way, even if they're unwilling to think that they would. And then eventually, like, kind of leads you into, you do end up, like, the beautiful alien comes down and says, I'll take this off your hands, and you're basically like, great, thanks, and then you
I
let
don't need to worry about it now.
yeah, I don't need to worry about it. And so you like let them do that. And then there's another part of the experience where it's trying to, which was added, like, this is not in the original story, but it tries to tell you, like, instead of, it makes you close your eyes, because the alien says at the end, the beautiful one says, like, I'm going to take this off your hand. All you need to do is close your eyes. And so then you elect to close your eyes. And so then the experience talks you through, like, okay, instead of closing your eyes, like, what you can do is actually, like, keep them open, sit with the discomfort, and it kind of has these, like, reassuring things where it's like, you don't essentially need to be a hero, but you do need to keep your eyes open and your wits about you. Things that you're experiencing aren't always going to be comfortable, what you're witnessing somebody go through, or all of these things. Anyways, so sorry, that's like such a long explanation.
No, that was a short explanation. You said so.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
the Spark Notes.
But what was really fascinating about showing this experience to people is people really didn't like it. And yeah, so because they
'Cause it's
didn't
uncomfortable.
like, it's
Yeah,
really
it's not a
uncomfortable.
It's not a pleasant, desirable experience
Yeah.
to go through.
And you have no agency in it. So
Right.
It's very,
Yeah.
Yeah, and so some people, like, mostly on opening night, we observed a lot. I also went back and stalked a little bit at the museum, but people when anything some were getting really angry, like this is broken and I can't select something else. Some people would just be like, I wouldn't have done that. Like I just want you to know that I would have helped the alien.
I just have to reassure everyone, really myself, that I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. And I think that was an interesting reaction because I'm like, sure, okay, but would you? You know what I mean?
In reality, would
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
That's so interesting because I think I've heard one definition of art is that it gives you more than what you put in. And I think this is a great example of like the experience you put together because it caused people to talk about it and have an emotion, even if that emotion is like, I don't understand. Why can't I do this thing? I think that is like what makes it special, right? Also, experiences that mess with the UI are like one of my favorite things.
Oh yeah,
I think that is just it's very meta, but it's also like just something I think is a really great tool to use. And I really enjoyed the experience that you made. I also thought your storytelling is, I've told you this before, I think you have really great taste in how you pace a story. And I think that you use that really well in that experience.
Thank you, Miko.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. Oh gosh, I want to tell you about, there's a couple of grad students I mentored and they did a game called Project Conchi. And it was a game about you are a radio operator and you're listening in on two sisters. And one of them has escaped the government and she's a rebel. And your job is to listen in and find, and then say, yes, they're going to this location. And yes, she's being helped by this person.
Help capture them.
And
participate.
I feel like it's okay. I need to look at my phone because I want to tell you the names of the creators.
While you're doing that, I was going to say, I actually think the experience from the perspective of the alien, one of the refugee aliens, it would be, I mean, I feel like that would be a great counterpoint, like to experience that, because the reality is that is most people's reality when they're in that experience. They're helpless. They don't have access to things. They can't do things.
Right.
And so no matter what they say, they get turned down. And so that's a lack of agency that builds your empathy for the people that are in that situation.
Yeah.
It kind of highlights, I think this kind of gets down to the reason that a lot of people were not happy about the experience after going through it, is because from the perspective of the ignorant individual that chooses not to pay attention or to turn an eye, it just highlights what most of us do with most problems on a regular basis.
It brings up a fear we have. Like it hits too close to home, I think. And that's the whole thing with the balance of empathy. You know, like how do you make it land and stay true without making it so true that somebody doesn't want to deal with it, you know?
There was a specific instance of this that I encountered maybe a year and a half ago where there were a couple people on the beach over in Alki. This is an area in Seattle that is really pretty. It feels very much like the coastline in California sometimes. I feel like it reminds me of Carmel, if you've ever been down there.
Yeah, I like that area. Yeah. Wait, is that where I'm thinking? Is it on the Olympic rainforest area?
Carmel.
Carmel is...
No,
Alki is West Seattle.
It's from West Seattle. It's actually just on the west side of West Seattle.
Oh, okay. I was thinking of...
So it's still in the Sound.
You're thinking of like La Push. And
out on the peninsula.
Thank you.
Different feels.
Yes,
both
very,
beautiful.
very different feel, but doesn't feel like a beach town out there, at least.
Right.
Right. Feels like vampires are around.
Okay,
Yeah,
very
it's a
much
Twilight
like a
town.
little beach walk.
Feels like vampires.
Let's talk about
Sparkly
Twilight
vampires.
again. Yeah.
And werewolf.
Feels like vampire werewolf teenage romance.
If you guys want to talk about that, we can.
Let's put a pin in it because we're going to come back to that.
Yeah.
But
go.
So this experience while I was walking down the beach on Alki, I ran into a couple people and they had like a stand set up and a bunch of food and everything laid out. So they were trying to lure people in, basically. And they had a couple of it was the phone-based headsets. I think there was the Gear VR,
Gear VR.
Samsung Gear VR. And they were basically trying to lure people in to view these first-person perspective experiences through a slaughterhouse.
Yep.
Which is an extreme experience to go through when you don't know what you're about to dive into, and you're like, sure, these people are. And I'm not hating on veganism or anything here.
Yeah.
Just these were two vegans that were kind of part of an organization, and they were trying to use this as an empathy generating tool.
Yep. Although it doesn't.
It's
doesn't
problematic.
particularly work for empathy. I think right off the bat like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
if they
sure
led you
it's
through the life of
disturbing.
the animal,
Yeah.
maybe you could do that because you would get in a sense of attachment. First
Yeah,
and then
you'd
go through that, but-
you'd develop an emotional
Yes.
But instead they're like,
experience.
see
with
this
them.
cute
if
little
you're just
pig?
straight into
Slaughter.
horror, it's
Yeah.
hard to say.
Yeah, it's like throwing somebody into what is that book that was written back at the beginning of the century? It was like The Jungle, where they were just describing the horrors
Oh,
of
yeah.
the meatpacking industry.
Yeah.
It's like you just throw somebody into a slaughterhouse experience where they go through it with all these other animals and everything. I mean, that is just a really questionable use of the technology to try to change people's minds, or
I think that's what one would call shoving something down your throat.
yeah. Like it's trying to force empathy in a way that is potentially scarring and is dangerous. You can psychologically harm people that don't know what they're about to jump
it
into.
goes into that whole like the sensitivity.
Yeah.
And how if you're going to do that, you have to treat it delicately and with
Yeah,
respect.
figure out how
And
to
there,
approach it.
there probably is a way to do that kind of experience and help
Yeah.
people understand a vegan point of view. This is a whole other topic, but I stream on Twitch, and a lot of my friends are cooking streamers.
Yeah.
So they cook on stream, and sometimes they'll do things like they'll cook crab. So they
Yeah.
have to kill a crab on the stream.
recording.
And that, I mean, it was a little like they actually they did it in the most humane way.
Okay.
But it does not look humane. It's like an
Right.
axe goes into a
You
crab's
crack its skull or something
Okay.
like
It's
that.
the reality of the.
But
Yeah,
then it
wow.
causes a whole every time that has happened, it's
commentary.
been a whole conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things they talked about is like if you're going, since they really care about making food and preparing food, they did talk about how like if you're going to prepare meat, you probably should think about that whole experience
Yeah.
and respect where it comes from.
Yeah.
I just think like I don't know what we could do about that other than the VR troopers, I guess, Kelly. But it just seems like when people's hearts are in the right place when they
Yeah.
make
The intent
experiences.
is
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Jay knows, but disclaimer that I am the vegan in the room. At least I don't think you're vegan, probably, right?
No.
Yeah.
I was at
I
one
dabble.
time,
Yeah, and you
and
do
when we
that.
have conversations like this, I'm always like, I should go back. I should.
I do own the Veganomicon. Does that count?
Oh.
I mean, I cook for that sometimes, but I'm not fully.
I mean,
vegan.
anything is any approach toward it is I feel is helpful, but I actually have a game design that I had done for my that I had started for my independent company before I realized how challenging that was to actually make function from a financial point of view. And it the working title was Pig Out, which is kind of ridiculous, but the idea was that you were a pig, or ideally a chicken or a cow, that was released by, like, you're in a factory farm and you get released by an animal liberation group comes in and opens your pen, and you have to escape. So it's like a first person kind of like,
Oh, wow.
So you go through the experience, you do that, but you have the agency and you're playing as the animal. But it's actually, the idea was that it would be engaging, and it's kind of like survival horror format, but you're doing something, but you're actually seeing all of those aspects of what it's like to be in that environment. So I think it is a really hard thing. Like, you can't just throw somebody if you throw them into that environment, they're just going to be like disturbed but not connect. And I think it's really hard. So
it's just psychologically jarring in a way that probably isn't going to get the end intent that you had to be internalized. They're just going to feel threatened or in danger or somehow psychologically scarred in a way that is going to completely
they're
override.
not absorbing it because there's a defense mechanism up. I have so many thoughts, but Miko, you
looking up something on your phone.
Yeah.
1 hour later.
Good luck with segues.
Just move things around. It'll be fine.
It's all right.
So this is a game called Operation Conchi, and I'll share the link with you all. But it's by two young women, Amanda Siswojo and Imperatrice Ung. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced your names because I worked directly with them on this a little bit. I basically advised them, and so it is a game where you are a radio operative, and these sisters are having what they think they think no one is listening to their phone calls, essentially, but you're listening. And after every section, you are supposed to tell your boss, where is the sister going? Who is her accomplice? And what they told me is that the feedback that they were getting from playtesters was that they were annoyed that they weren't told earlier that, like, they shouldn't give the right answers, because if you give the right answers, the sister gets caught, right? And
It's like, what?
and I thought that was really exciting, and I'm
Yeah.
really glad that they kind of stuck to their guns with this project.
Yeah.
Because like I think the people that experience that, it's so interesting because maybe when you're at a booth at a show and you're playing a game, you're thinking, my job is to give feedback about this, and maybe you don't totally trust the experience yet. But I think that they did everything right in this case, and you could play it again. When I first played it, I played it immediately again, and I gave the wrong answers because I wanted them to get away.
Yeah,
and
see
what
happens in that regard.
Yeah, and I really loved what they did here.
Yeah, that whole putting you in the situation of having to make interesting decisions, particularly that type of thing where it's like this. There's a tendency for a lot of people to listen to authority automatically and not question. And in games, that's really common. Like you're like, oh well, the design, the thing presented to me was to do this. Of course, I did that because I feel like I'm being led through the experience. But they're breaking that or creating a way that the player can break that, or giving somebody an alternative experience where they can do something that's against maybe that standard social conditioning. It's pretty huge. Like,
there was a really good example of this years ago, and specifically, I think it was Call of Duty Modern Warfare.
you could
or actually, I think it was Modern Warfare 2. The beginning of the game, and correct this after the fact if that's not correct. The very beginning of the game, you were set into the role of a CIA agent, I believe, that was undercover as part of a terrorist operation where there's a bunch of operatives from another country that are going into a mall in that country and are going to shoot up the place. So it's essentially like that experience that was a school shooting that got shut down. This was years ago. Yeah, so you're basically undercover in a terrorist group during an operation, and you as the player experience standing in that person's shoes. And you know that you're an undercover operative, and you're like this whole thing is not necessarily supported by the government, but you have to make this sort of ethical choice of what do I do in order to not out myself and in order to not stand out among this group as they do this horrific thing in front of me. And I think there was a Kotaku article that was written on this. Like a lot of people, if you think back to that experience, they probably just went along with it. And then there were lots of other people that basically just walked through and witnessed all this stuff happening, but refused to actually engage in attacking anyone. And especially these days, it's a very sort of controversial experience to be put into a game.
I think the VR aspect is a really interesting player in that, because if you put somebody in the position of doing that same stuff in VR, there's a very different feeling to, like, you feel like it's your action in a way that I feel like you didn't on 2D screens a lot of times.
Yeah, it was easier to separate yourself.
So I think that could be an interesting thing to see, like, would people do the same thing? Like if you put them side by side, had people play both those experiences, like how many people go through it versus stop if they play VR version of it.
There's a game term for what we're talking about, and I'm blanking on it. And it's like somebody told me who has worked in the game industry for a while that it's like an overused term, but it's for when you create like an experience that the player disassociates themselves, like because you want your player to embody whatever person you're making them embody whatever character they're playing, right? And there's a term for I feel like it begins with a D. I'll look it up.
Just dispatch.
Yeah.
Just D words.
Yeah.
Disassociation. It's not disassociation.
It's not disassociation. It's like
depersonalization.
No,
because that is what
you're on a roll. Just
that
keep
is
going.
what that
yeah,
means.
but it is. I'll look it up and see if I can find it, and won't listen to anything anyone says for the rest of the time because I'll just be thinking about it.
This was my deepest. This is my deepest fear coming on this podcast. Is I would be like, oh yeah, I remember this thing, and then people write to you and say she got the word wrong.
Yeah.
She got the date wrong.
Yeah.
Well, we would just write back to them and be like, fuck you.
Just a human, all right?
Write to us. It's awesome.
Yeah. If you're writing to us, then somebody cares a lot more than we can hope for.
There is a common term for that, and it is basically when it is the act. It's like creating something where you disassociate from the character that you're playing, and some games do this intentionally,
like as part of the game mechanic.
Yeah, and it's highly discouraged in, I think, typical game design. Like if you want a real, it's like, well, okay, if you want to make the romantic comedy that like hits all the parts, like you don't want to have this effect. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
or something
it's
like
a
that. It's not something
potentially
you aim to have all the time. Yeah.
It's a potentially adverse experience to people actually engaging with and continuing to want to play your game.
And totally. And I think it potentially adverse is even being kind. It's like guaranteed a problem
not
for
pleasant.
most people. And then like some people will get it. And it's like that whole, like, I trust my audience, you know what I mean? But I think it is an interesting topic. It's like, so if you choose to use that, how do you use it appropriately, or is it ever really appropriate? In the case of the game you were just describing, Miko, it sounds like you have an appreciation for that. But probably for a lot of people, it's like, well, what are the people who created that game? Who do they want to target, and what do they want to do? Because the problem is that you already have an open mind who's like thinking that way, right? So it could potentially become an echo chamber type of thing where they're creating for the people, the only people who are going to get what you're trying to do with it already have that mindset.
Yeah. You're talking about the military shooter, and another one that does this is Spec Ops: The Line.
Oh, okay.
Which is a really fascinating game that was, presented as if like you're the hero, you're the American hero, and you're killing the bad people from another land.
But then things get dark.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth looking into that. I'm sure there's been some excellent. I watched a Let's Play of it, and there's there's actually like people have written books describing the detail in this game, because their whole. I do believe the creators planned to make this a game where you would question, why do you play military shooters?
Yeah.
And they make the killings more violent as you go on. And then there's kind of a turning point where you kill innocent people, and your main character, you're not sure is a hero anymore.
Right. You feel very conflicted about your action.
And I mean, this is the area where I'm like, people are going to write in and say I got it all wrong. But I think one of the creators in an interview said, you always have a choice. You can choose not to play. Yeah. And I thought that was pretty
That's
gutsy.
fascinating.
Ooh,
to be like, essentially.
Our game.
Yeah. They're like, we want you to question, why do you do this for entertainment?
Yeah.
Is a really interesting question.
I imagine a lot of people that make things like that have that kind of mentality behind what they're doing would probably actually love to make a game where you really could make the choice to not do the things. It's just so difficult to do that. Like open into design from a development and modding. Like it's so complicated.
And I think that Spec Ops was a pretty well-known series when this game came out. Yeah. And so they already had an audience. I think that
we're going to be engaged.
Yeah, I think you can make more gutsy choices when you are a new IP.
Yep. Yeah, big publishers do not like it when you tell people not to play your game. That's generally not looked well upon.
I remember the word without even looking it up. It's ludonarrative dissonance.
Wow.
Is anyone familiar with this word?
Dissonance.
I've definitely heard that before. Yeah.
Well, I was so excited when I learned this word, and then I felt all like ha ha ha, like in my game that that experience I was creating for the museum. I was like describing it to my friend Tam, wherever. Hopefully he'll never listen, but hopefully he does, because he was just like, he works in he creates moss.
Moss is a great game.
He runs that company, and so I'm like all like excited about this new term that I learned, and I'm like, anyways, the experience is just like ludonarrative dissonance, and he was just like I could like feel the eye roll from him. He's just like, I'm like,
I can tell you looked that up 10 minutes ago.
And he was just like, it's just like, no, he was actually really nice at it. He's like, it's just like kind of an overused word in the industry, and I was like, okay,
I've actually never heard it, but I'm not in design. I'm not a designer. I'm on the art side, so
it's also kind of academic.
I think that's the thing. It's maybe like an overused academic term, but every academic term is overused.
Can we break it down a little bit? Like being ludonarrative?
What does ludo mean as a word? I don't know ludo as a word.
It means
about
light.
Games.
I'm just kidding.
Okay. Nice.
Ludo.
It's about games.
Really?
Yeah, like if your ludography is like your list of games you've made.
Okay.
What?
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
So thank you. Jeez.
We're learning so much.
I've been in the game industry like over 20 years. I've never heard that term in my
having
life.
an existential
It's
crisis.
because I've had an academic background.
There you go.
But I've lost a lot of the words.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so Ludo means about games. Narrative
so
means about the
Ludo
story.
is
the
interactive narrative
Yeah.
or game-focused narrative, and then dissonance means that you are creating some sort of psychological friction with
It's
in the
like
narrative.
a disconnect, right? Like
Yeah.
It is. Well,
Dissonance in
cognitive. What does
audio is-
cognitive dissonance mean? Because I feel like I always liked this term, but I never seem to get it right.
Two conflicting states, essentially.
Yeah,
Oh,
like it's like
right,
you
yeah.
believe something that you also have maybe facts or knowledge outside of that completely conflicts with this maybe irrational belief that you have.
Right. Yeah.
But at that point in time, the cognitive dissonance is that you're still holding on to some state of belief, even though there's other information currently existing in your head that doesn't quite fit
Yeah.
or
So you
make
can't
sense.
get a solid picture.
Yeah.
I don't know
in-
if. Well, yeah. Go ahead.
I was
yeah.
just gonna say in music, it's also just when if you have two notes right next to each other, when you don't have the
Yeah.
proper interval, you get a pattern that is
Yeah.
upsetting.
It's very
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Makes you feel
it's
Thank
uncomfortable.
you. That makes
It's often
sense.
used in horror to
Yep.
create that sort of
Yeah.
uneasy environment because you're just like,
We don't react well to
like
it.
a half
resolve
step
somehow.
combined. Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I don't know if this applies, but I remember the first time I really thought about the term cognitive dissonance is when I went to business school, so like I didn't learn a lot of psychology at all in my academic learnings, and I was dating a complete asshole.
Man, call out.
I will continue.
You're like
Do you wanna
past
just get
self.
into it?
What
No,
were you
I-
doing?
I'm kidding.
You probably should back off that one.
No, but and I like,
go for a long
but I
time.
loved him, and I knew how awful he was, and
This is a
I had
perfect
this
example.
feeling of like, it was this conflict in my brain of like, I know exactly what's going on, but I can't stop these feelings that I have,
Yep.
and I wondered if like that was an appropriate application, and a lot of people struggle with that. I'm sure that's why people get stuck in like really
Abusive
relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's all this sort of emotional load and triggers about that person that continue to make them appealing to you, even though you maybe rationally or logically you've walked through it a million times and you're like, they're not good for me. I know because of all these different things, but I'm still attached to them. Somehow they still keep pulling me back in.
Yeah.
I want to play that game.
Yeah. I mean,
of
that would
how
be a
many
really
people it
useful
would help.
experience. I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. But I mean, the trick is
But also a trigger.
Yeah, very,
Yeah.
very trigger,
Yeah.
trigger heavy, which is that's a difficult thing to monitor as far as like content for
that's another thing
experiences.
for the VR troopers.
Yeah.
There you go.
So are you saying it's uncomfortable? Because I feel like probably my favorite type of game, and I like to play and kind of observe a lot of the indie space, and I love like personal games that are like not perfect, but they're so in the voice of their author, and it's a situation where they're like, nobody's making the game I want to make, and I'm going to make
So they
it.
just
I'm gonna do it myself.
And I love that kind of experience. And so I really like, I sort of seek out games where I'm playing someone that's not much like me or that I haven't seen as a main character before.
Yeah.
So is it supposed to be like it's uncomfortable, or is it like I don't like or is it more like I think I'm playing a villain and I don't like it, but
This
I'm
is
still
back to Ludo narrative dissonance.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it is meant to be uncomfortable. I mean, the point is that it's putting you in a position you don't want to be in, meaning it's not like, okay, so I think what is not applicable or what is like something where, let's say you don't like bears, so you don't want to play a bear.
Right. That's very simple.
That's just like, okay,
doesn't
then
really-
don't play it. And that's just
Yeah.
like what the character is. It's almost like it has to catch you in something or force you into this position. For example,
Oh, you
it was
expected it was
right.
something. And
Yeah.
It's like
something
really
else
You're
now.
caught off
So like
guard.
the Papers, Please, that game, which for anyone who doesn't know, that's what it's called, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a video game done by this dude who I forget his name, but he like is like
Lucas Pope.
yeah, that sounds about right. He does like the most
Good
amazing
job.
games and just like disappears for years and does them all by himself, and it's super annoying. But love his work.
It's also the dream.
Yeah, it's also
Yes.
the dream. But literally, sorry, like side note, at like the game developers conference last year, he won so many awards for
Oberdin. Yeah.
the Return of Oberdin,
Return of Oberdin,
this amazing game. I definitely suggest it. But like he kept winning the awards, and he kept going up, and he had nobody to thank because he's like, yeah,
'Cause
I
he's like, I
basically
did
did
it.
this myself. I'm like, I don't know, thank. You're like, you didn't do all the voices. There's no way.
Thank
you
your
did all the
mom at
voices."
least.
Yeah. He's like, "Thanks for my wife because like I don't
was
hang out with
supportive.
her enough." Yeah.
There's no
Supported
shade
me
to
being
Lucas
very
Pope.
reclusive.
I actually think he's really amazing.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, I'm just envious. This is what happens. Jay knows me well enough. Anytime I'm envious,
that
I'm
clearly
just like
came
from a
talking
place of
shit
resentment
about
comes
him.
out.
Yeah.
I would love to highlight that for a second, though. I saw a tweet once that was like, okay, we all love Stardew Valley, which is another game made
Yep.
by one person. And there was a tweet I saw that was like, can we just give a shout out to the girlfriend that supported him for 4 years
Oh,
so
yeah.
he could finish the game? And I was like, that's so
Yeah.
true,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, even if someone does do all
They still
the
have
stuff
some
themselves,
kind of network
Yeah.
generally.
I
of
think
some
that's
people.
really cool to like take a minute to be like,
Yeah.
hey, who emotionally or financially, she was like the producer of that game.
Yeah,
right? If you think about
She
it,
was enabling
publisher,
the
No, not
space.
really. Yeah, but I just think that's really cool. My husband and I make indie games together. We emotionally support each other and help each other, and I just think that's like a really special thing, and should kind of be highlighted.
Yeah, I'll give
more.
a shout out thank to my
Absolutely.
wife for tolerating years and years of game industry.
And do you feel like you go to her with just like even just letting out thoughts about like what's going on? Because I feel like even when somebody doesn't get credit, like they're not technically getting their hands super dirty. It's like they are the you bounce
They're the
thoughts
sounding
off of
board
them.
constantly.
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
they're
She
dealing
knows an
with-
astounding amount about the game industry, and having never
just-
been in it.
She's gonna have
Just
her
by
own
osmosis.
anonymous
Yes,
blog or
exactly.
We'll have
her
her
own
on
podcast.
next.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that'd be
There you go.
amazing.
Have her on.
Yeah. Anyways, there was a game, and I have already confessed many times on this podcast that I'm not like a huge gamer. So it was like some shooter game that in order to get to the next level, you had to like shoot some children or do something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, the one you were talking about earlier.
No, that was a
different
different one.
Oh, wow.
That
There's
was
more than one
There's
game where you
multiple.
shoot in a
I think.
Jeez.
Okay,
there is.
I'm pretty
Yeah, they're
sure that they're
definitely-
different. Like the one, because the one I was talking about earlier was some VR game that was like the school shooting one.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that was completely different, and this was not a VR game. Because that one got like taken down, and this other one I think was more of like a softer application of it. Like it was still really hard, but not as grossly like inconsiderate.
It sounded like
over the top.
game. It sounded like the
Yeah.
game Jay was describing earlier.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
might be the same one, but I don't know. But you had to it's like you're playing this whole game, and then in order to get to the next level, there's like this pretty nasty thing you have to do and get through. And it was like, do you stop playing or whatever? So
Yeah,
it's that
yeah.
same thing. So that's kind of the application of ludonarrative dissonance is like making it's putting somebody into a character and then giving them an experience where they're like, so they identify with this character and then suddenly they don't. And the reason it's not suggested is that it's not just that it makes somebody uncomfortable. It's like it's bad storytelling. What you want is to have somebody be immersed and feel like they're this person. So when you do something like that, you're suddenly breaking the illusion.
What is it? The breaking the fourth wall, or like in narrative, isn't that the term? You know, like in a
Breaking the
show
fourth
where
wall is when you look in the camera. So that's a different thing.
It's like
Yeah,
when
but-
the character knows.
yeah,
that the audience is
But, like,
there.
Create the same
for
scenario.
a moment, it
Yeah.
breaks the
Oh,
immersion.
I see what you're saying.
Oh,
yeah,
Yeah, it breaks
It'll
that
create the same
separation.
There's another similar term about the magic circle.
Okay.
So when you
Yep.
go to play a game,
Yeah.
you voluntarily enter the magic circle,
Yeah.
which means I am agreeing that I am playing
You
a game.
suspend disbelief.
Yes, it's exactly
Yeah.
that.
I actually
Right.
looked this up because of the pervasive game thing.
Oh.
From Evie's thing.
Yes.
Oh.
Awesome.
It was that's a big part of the pervasive game thing is
Yeah.
defining that magic circle and finding
Yeah.
where things go. So
And there, I
Wait,
think
say more about
Yeah.
that.
What do you mean? The defining
it was
them?
just because pervasive games, because the idea from the last podcast, if you have to listen to it,
yeah.
episode 4.
was
Yeah.
the last released one.
Yeah.
The whole idea is that a big part of pervasive games, since they extend out throughout life instead of just being contained, is that they redefine where that magic circle is.
Yeah.
Like they can create this massive magic circle that encompasses long periods of time.
Like what are the edges
no
of your
particular
story?
space.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
it basically extends that into that game world so that it encompasses all of life or everything around you, everything else. So
Right. And so what you're saying is, so that illusion that you're creating, it is kind of bizarre to think about that with pervasive games where it's like
Yeah.
it's already hard enough to create illusion and what's the word I'm looking for? Belief. Yeah, like because suspending.
sense
Yeah,
of
disbelief.
suspense of disbelief. yeah.
Right. That to do that in a game, it's already kind of hard enough to like convince people into this whole thing,
Yeah,
you know.
to,
But
to
then
draw
to do
them in
that,
smoothly.
right? To draw them in
Without
smoothly
them
and make
knowing
them
it.
right. which is what one would consider like smooth design and good design. And then to do that so that it's not just in that encapsulated experiences, but pervades elsewhere. But yeah, basically coming back to I want to call it cognitive dissonance, but the ludonarrative dissonance. So basically people are saying don't do it. And then when someone is doing it, like in Papers, Please. Oh, so to explain that game, you're like, are you in Russia?
Guard? I don't think it's actually Russia. I think it's like a fictional character.
Okay.
Country.
Okay.
And I don't know
You're
if
border
was
guard.
that country was that like country discrimination of me? I don't know. It made it seem
has
like
an
it
Eastern
was.
European feel for sure.
Okay. But you are the person reading passports and declining people getting from one place to the other, but they're like changing up the rules on you, and you realize suddenly that like you are kind of enabling bad powers in what they're doing with the passports.
You're being a conduit for these kind of just decisions that are indiscriminate and have very little sort of consideration for the people that they're affecting.
Right. Yeah. And you introduced me to that game, Miko, because I think I was talking to you about what I was trying to do with the museum experience. And it is hard because like in that game, you're like, okay, so it literally shows you a screen. Have you guys played it?
Nope.
Okay, so it literally shows you a screen of who is dying or starving or sick because of you. Because you have and this is the conundrum.
So you see the aftermath.
You are still a character as well.
Yeah.
And so you have limited funds, and you'll find like it'll say like your nephew moves in with you, and now you don't
so you
have
can
enough.
start to identify with the people that you're.
Yeah. So it's like as your tendency playing the game may be that you want to be a good person. And when someone says, hey, I'm fleeing something, just lie and let me in, please. You'll say, okay, I'll do it. But then there's another layer to it, which is that you are also a character and you have your own issues at home.
Well, and it's like if you get fired or if you don't make enough money, it's basically like your performance, you'll be deducted points if you do these things that are good.
Right.
Or quote unquote good.
Your job relies on you.
Right. Your job and your money
rules.
relies on this. And then you'll see the effects. You'll go home and you're like in between. It'll just show you you're like going home. You don't actually like walk into a house. It's just like you feel like you have in the sense that a scoreboard comes up and says like, okay, your wife is sick and you have to dictate where you put money. The money that you have, does it go to food, medication, hospitalization of like your family or education or something like that? And so you already have these limited funds and you have to deal with the fact that, well, I need to make bad decisions in order to make more money. And then you're choosing where all of that goes and you're seeing the effects, like somebody will die or somebody will get sicker and sicker or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it puts a lot of pressure on you to do the things that you don't want to do. And I think
much like real life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that game actually did a kind of genius job of it because it wasn't so in your face. It's not like showing you that it's not like showing you gross images of your family getting sick and dying or anything like that. It's not it's blatant and in your face, but I think the difference would be if they didn't add that family thing, it would be a totally different game. Because if they're just
There's
like,
no
oh,
consequence
somebody's
to
telling you to do something,
You're just
and it's
playing
just like, oh, you're a bad person.
a border
because you're,
guard sim.
Exactly. But because it added that, it made you think. You're like, right, like these people are people that have all these other considerations. And like you said, Mike, I mean, it's everything in the world are these constant, complex, connected decisions where we're not always trying to do something that's blatantly like black and white, bad or good. We're just trying to like survive and support things and it incrementally changes into something worse.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, if you create a world where everyone's in competition, you have limited resources. I mean, I've done a lot of work and like volunteer work in the area of race and social justice. And I used to have this very idyllic concept that if everybody understood that the system was unfair and broken and they would want to fix that system.
Yeah.
Like, why would people not want to fix that system? I know
Why
all
would
my
it
white
persist?
friends would want to do something about that. They don't want to play an unfair game. But the reality is when you put everybody into a situation where they're going to have a hard time surviving if they don't have their advantages, people make very different decisions. And I think that's what's you have to, if you can't build some construct that lets people understand that, it's really hard to get until you're in that situation. And people do it every day and they don't even realize they're doing it too. So
So it seems like the underlying sort of mechanic of creating an experience that is supposed to put you in an empathetic position towards some other individual or group or people that you're affecting, whether it's like your alien experience or it's your border guard, and you're seeing the impact on these people that are refugees or whoever that are trying to cross because of some sort of situation or harm that they might come under. There's a sort of underlying mechanic of figuring out gosh, I am blanking on how to explain this.
Maybe you're saying like games are about rules. And usually in a game, you are given an objective or a goal, and you follow the rules and you win. And I think these are games and experiences that challenge that. And in real life as well, in history, there were times where following the rules was morally bad. The wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
And these kinds of experiences can kind of help you if you ever are in that situation, whether it's staying with somebody who's not good for you or it's a government situation where you are in danger, your family's in danger.
Yeah.
Or you're supporting a bad you're acting as an agent of a bad group,
or even in a corporation situation, it could be true too.
And at least looking at that particular border situation, they did a good job with that, potentially because they slowly and incrementally introduced the player, the person experiencing it, to these serious situations with cognitive dissonance. They know that they need to follow the rules for their employer, and at the same time, they know how it's going to impact these people that they are or are not going to allow through. But not doing it so fast that it is jarring and basically breaks that person's immediate ability to just to continue through that experience. And
well, I think what that one did is it made you wonder, can I beat it? Can I make enough money to save my family and also make some good decisions? And so it kept you sucked in some way or form. That said, like, a lot of people, I think, don't finish the game. They're like, okay, I get it. And then they move on. And
but there are multiple endings to the game, though.
Yeah.
So it was a very similar game I played recently. It's called Neocab. And it is a game where it's sort of a dystopian future where you are a cab driver, and the majority of the game is that you choose who you're going to pick up in your cab, and they talk to you while they're there.
Yeah.
But there's sort of a Tesla-like corporation where like people don't believe human drivers are safe anymore.
Yeah.
And you're like one of the last people that is still like a human driver.
Oh.
And everybody
it's
else.
Happen.
It's actually really well written, really great world building. So on the higher level, you've entered a city where people are like, oh, I can't believe I have to take this death trap. Like, I'm only doing this because of this situation. And you're like, yeah, that's insulting, you know? And
like,
you learn a lot about
offensive.
these like really interesting characters like in your car.
Yeah.
But there's also there is a game where like at the end of the night, I mean, you have to pay for gas and you have to pay for your lodging every night. So you have to decide, am I going to use the capsule hotel, which is also owned by the same corporation?
Yeah.
Or am I going to pay more money to stay at this kind of Airbnb style house with this real person?
Yeah.
Not support my enemy effectively. Or the people that are trying to.
And I really recommend this game, Neocab, because on a personal level, the story of your character is essentially she has a best friend and she's so excited to move here, but your best friend is making a lot of questionable decisions. And you're kind of in this situation where you're like, is she gaslighting me? Is she actually a good friend? And your mood changes. And when your mood changes too much, you as a person, like as a player, cannot make the choice that you know is right for the character.
Oh, interesting. That's actually interesting.
That's a
Push the
mechanic.
dialogue.
Yeah, because it's actually part of the story as well, because you wear a mood bracelet that shows your
You
mood.
can see when you're going to make poor decisions.
And other people can see it too when they're in the cab with you. So they can be like, oh, I pissed you off right then.
That's really
I see that
cool.
offended you a
That is
bit.
a great mechanic.
I do not want to wear one.
Yes.
And so there is sort of like there's a anarchy happening, and you can kind of choose for yourself how much you want to get involved. But your character has this realistic, I only have so much money. You could lose, like, if you don't get a high enough rating, you won't be able to pick up certain passengers. So
Yeah.
you might have to be nice to someone that you think is a jerk so that they give you a 5-star rating.
Yeah, try not to actually get angry
Yeah.
according
Yeah,
to your
that's
mood
just
rating.
That's
I'd
fascinating.
recommend it. It's a really great game.
And then there's the meta question of really should you be fighting the system because more people are going to die if you drive your cab. Statistically, more people are going to die if you drive your cab.
Yeah, I mean that's what they believe in the game as well.
Yeah, I mean that probably is the
Interesting.
reality.
Yeah.
It's going to be a big fight when it comes around.
So, Miko, you like experiences like this. You seek them out, and I want to know why you do and what you get out of it, because I think that the debate with this is like going back to kind of the whole like vegan thing and that slaughterhouse experience and empathy. I feel like VR is obviously everyone empathy. Speaking of overused terms, empathy is a huge one that everyone talks about in VR. And by the way, VR is not the only thing that creates empathy.
Yes, we got these things called books.
Empathy.
Yeah, we have,
Or-
yes, Mike. I knew this is why we were friends.
Yes, exactly.
Because I'm just like, what? It's not like the first thing we've ever had. Everyone's like,
No.
oh, suddenly now
No.
we can teach people how to get in the minds of others.
No,
I'm like, what?
it's effective storytelling or like real conversation.
Interestingly, I
Right.
feel like books
Person.
are actually probably closer, like a bigger ability to generate empathy than I think most other mediums since then. Just in the sense that I feel like because you're creating an entire experience in your
this is
mind, I actually feel like they tend to be more empathy driving for me at
Yeah.
least than
interesting.
movies or songs or other
Yeah.
things. So
Oh my God. Okay, so many questions there. Let's
This
come
is-
back
yeah,
to that
this is
one
a
because I
gold
do
mine.
want to hear because it's like all related, which is like, okay, well, this is what's going on in my brain right now, so I'm just going to vocalize it. I'm like, okay, well, like how do you create empathy? But then like in a lot of cases, I mean, empathy has a range of like, okay, well, I can be empathetic to something really small that doesn't matter as much versus something really big. And we're talking about some of the bigger things like shootings and murderings and affecting people's lives and all of this stuff. And that's where it can be like, okay, where is that line? How do we balance and create experiences that are helping us with empathy and teaching us something without making us reject it or without making
Without crossing
creating
that
trauma or something
comfort
like
threshold.
that, right? Yeah, because just as a lot of this conversation started in the case of horror, well, it's so powerful in a lot of ways that that we have to be careful with how we do it. But in the for you, Miko, you like those types of experiences that kind of create empathy in a way that for a lot of people is too aggressive. So why do you like that?
All right. How much more time do we have?
I know.
giant question.
Yeah. Well, actually, I do think it's sort of related to horror. One of the things I like about horror is that really good horror, even if it's supernatural and it's about zombies or ghosts or something, there's usually like a real truth to it.
it uncovers some sort of deep aspect.
I
of
recently read Haunting of Hill House, which is a classic book by Shirley Jackson.
Also made into a show.
Yeah, the show is amazing too.
The show is amazing. And I was really struck by the novel because even though it's about a haunted house, it's really about like
Relationships.
Yeah, and it's about loneliness. I think it really like the main character is not likable and she doesn't fit in and she knows it.
Okay.
And I think it just really hit me with like that sort of like primal fear that I think many people have, that like people in a room don't like me. I'm making a joke and maybe they don't like what I'm saying. And she has a lot of this anxiety when she speaks to others, that she knows she doesn't belong and she wants to belong so much. And that's, I think, what makes that such a really good horror novel.
Okay.
I think for me, actually, I don't know where it began, but I have I've like had some trauma in my life, and creating things like writing and designing games have really helped me with that. And I think that I was just really inspired by the bravery that some people have when they put themselves out there. There's a designer named Nina Freeman that I like a lot, and she made this game called Sybil. And it's a game about relationships she had where she used to play an online MMO and she was flirting with a guy and eventually they had a relationship, but it didn't end well. And Nina does her own voice in the game and she stars in it. There's like video of her flirting, like taking sexy selfies and stuff. And I thought that was so impressive, I think, to make a game that you put your own body and face and voice in that is about an experience you had that
It's
was
like straight
sad.
up vulnerability.
Yeah,
Like the most
like exposing.
clear example.
Yes.
Of it. Yep.
And when you basically you play the MMO and you listen to them flirting with each other over voice chat, and it feels like you're almost like voyeuristic.
Yeah, like you shouldn't be there actually witnessing this interaction.
Yeah, and I think I just really get emotional about bravery and about how people put themselves out there, because knowing that it's so easy to laugh at something, like it's so easy for others to mock something like that.
Yeah.
I made a game a couple years ago about my grandmother in a hospice.
I was just about to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did that because I want to make, my father passed away when I was 18, and it took me a long time to talk about that. And I basically this whole time have designed a game that helped me, just the designing of it
Just
helped
to work
me.
through
Yeah.
all of those.
And I, hope to be starting that seriously in the next couple years. But I made hospice because it was my grandmother getting sick and being in the hospice was the first time since then that I had a relative that was in danger. And so while we were there with her, it was an experience where she had a stroke, and you don't know if they can hear you or not.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're there, and if she can hear me, you're trying to put on a brave face, and you're just telling her things that you experienced together. And then, because you think it's very possible she could wake up. I mean, people do.
Yeah.
You just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so in that case, basically every night we would go home, and I would work in Unity, and I was drawing the hospital room, and I was recording sounds from the hallways, and that was kind of how I dealt with this, because it was so hard for me. And I made myself release that game because I wanted to be like these people that I really love that are so brave.
That's amazing.
And
you're willing to expose and externalize all of that very internal turmoil and just difficult emotional.
Yeah. And the
to
thing
deal
is that when you make a game like this, another example that's much more famous than my game, That Dragon Cancer, is about Ryan Green and his son who had cancer. He's only 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I met him, and I was, I feel like I actually have a long history of going to game events and crying in people's faces because I'm like, you did something really important, and it's
really
leaking.
inspiring.
Yeah. But he hugged me, and he does remember me, and we chat sometimes on Twitter. And I just think sometimes people don't play these games, but they're glad they're there.
Yeah.
He told me lots of people didn't play his game because it was too hard to play it. And I saw that as well. There was a Kotaku article about my game, and the comments were a lot of people saying oh, I can't play this, but I've been there and I remember when this happened. And so I think that's where we're really it's hard to explain, but I think sometimes you're just glad somebody put something into an experience and put it out there, because we could put anything out there. We could put anything out there as a game, as an experience. And the wider spectrum of that is fascinating.
Yeah.
That's where things start to get actually interesting, away from the typical norm of most experiences.
Yeah. And, it's a very short game, and it's, I make other things too. And so I don't mind if people don't play it, but I think it was just important for me as a creator to make it. And when I see other people doing something and it's not something that maybe hits me really hard, because sometimes I can't play these games either.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to be there too. I know there's a game, Popo and Yo, that's also similar. It's a game about, it was about the creator and how he dealt with his dad's alcoholism. But on the surface, it doesn't seem like that's very metaphorical. It's about a young boy who has a monster for a friend. And the monster is often lazy and sleeping and not doing much, but sometimes the monster is angry, right?
Right.
And I think that game is so beautiful, and just really hit me home. So I
Yeah.
think it's just like, I'm just so inspired and in awe of people that can make me feel something so deeply. And I also think that games, and I think this is true about VR experiences as well, because, you know, on a little tangent, I think maybe we made a mistake by calling all interactive experiences games.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's very limiting and misleading about the range of experience
Yeah.
that you can
Absolutely.
have.
And so, you know, VR is often interactive, but it's not always a case where you're trying to win something, right?
Yeah.
I think it's almost like, if you just take a step back, it's almost a miracle that anything is ever finished. I mean, it takes art, music, writing,
Yeah, it's a massive
production,
production. Yep.
technical expertise to make anything complete and out there. And as consumers, we just say, "Oh, that's funny. There's so many bugs in it." But it's like, really, you're just even lucky that it even happened.
Right.
You know?
Serious
Let's say
undertaking.
that about all kinds of different projects. I mean, whether it's a movie happening or a video game,
Yeah.
it is so incredible that people actually managed to pull all of those different elements together and actually make something that was remotely compelling
Right.
at the end of the day.
And like with indie films, in games or interactive experiences, a lot of the time it's one individual or a very small team who is creating experiences that are these unique type of experiences that are not the first person shooter games, and they exist out there, and it would be so easy for them to not exist because there's not a lot of money in them.
Yep.
And
It's
it
a harder
takes
path.
Right. It's a really hard path, but yeah, I just totally respect what you just said, Miko, because it is, you have such a deep appreciation for the people that create those things, because you know it wasn't easy. Not only, and we're talking about like just actually executing the creation of a game, but then like it is very emotionally straining to
put that out
create,
there.
to create those types of vulnerable games. So in what you were just talking about, Miko, we have this like some experiences, even if you do appreciate them and have a respect, they might be triggering or too close to home. And that reminded me of, I was at some conference listening to somebody talk about an experience that had to do with sexual harassment, or it wasn't harassment, something that had to do with maybe sexual abuse. Either way, it was a tough topic, and they were talking about triggering effects in games, and that actually, when you create a game that's like, oh, this is what this person went through, it's actually really risky, because people that have been through that, it's triggering for them, which can have some serious damage and effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's really hard to figure out the right ways. You don't necessarily need to show that something happened. You can allude to it and still reach the people who didn't go through it. It's like, you know, finding that balance between like, how much do I show versus not show, where I'm having an impact but not creating something that's too strong to the point where it's too uncomfortable or triggering. But what was fascinating about that is they said that the people who actually found it the most helpful, that appreciated it, were the family and friends of somebody who had been through that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I had a recent example of that as well, where somebody was talking about with medical VR how this isn't story driven, but it's a similar concept where like this experience of looking at complex brain surgery, that it wasn't, yes, like surgeons and doctors can use VR to see what they're doing. But it was actually most helpful to the families of the patient to understand and visualize what was going on or what was going to happen
to see
their
what
loved one.
their loved one's going to go through.
Right. And that person was
procedure.
probably too close to home. Like, you don't want to look at what's wrong with you and what's happening with your brain, but somebody else has a really deep appreciation for understanding that and driving that, seeking that empathy to try and understand what you're going through and help you and know what to say and how to support you. And so in that way, I mean, even if like it's not suitable for some people, I think no matter what, it should be out there because it's suitable for some.
I think that the other thing is that your aspect as a creator, that's kind of a fascinating thing, that talking about how it helps you deal with the subject and go through it. I mean, art therapy has always been a huge thing. I've never heard of game creation therapy, but it's essentially the same scenario, even more in detail, because you're really breaking it down and thinking about it in an interactive way. So that seems really fascinating. Like if you could have like workshops where people could
just build games, based off
or
of
at
there.
least be the originator of the idea and work through the design side of it, and you have
Yeah.
people to help them implement it and do those kind of things.
Yeah.
Like it is really good therapy type thing.
Yeah, because if you're just painting or making music, or a lot of like more traditional art forms, it's a lot more straight from your mind into the medium, and you don't have to kind of computationally or like logically think through all of these different elements and how they're going to affect the people that actually experience it at the end of the day. Whereas games force you to step into the shoes of your end user, your end player,
Right.
and imagine how their experience of what you're building is going
Kind of
to be.
explain your experience. And it makes you voice your experience in a way that's very direct and very kind of literal.
Yeah, that makes sense why it would be so effective as a therapy in going through something, because you literally have to take that internal experience, fully externalize it, and put it outside of yourself, and then sort it out and break it down to a degree that you would never do in most other circumstances, whether you're writing or making a painting or something.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think no matter what, when you're going through some sort of therapeutic experience, the whole point is that it was difficult and painful for you. And when you're putting that out for others to experience, it's really up to them whether they, want to go along with that with you and experience that as well.
Yeah.
And I think the risk of, I feel like I'm learning this as we're speaking, the risk of, I'm learning this as we're speaking because I struggled after I had feedback from that museum exhibit. I thought I wanted to distance myself from creating games that were too hard for people.
Oh.
And one of the more recent feedback I had from it was I was applying for a contract to do an empathy project actually for hospitals who, local hospitals who want to create an experience that trains their staff into how to empathize with mentally ill patients.
Okay.
And so they wanted a showcase of work that dealt with tough subjects. And some of their feedback, I went pretty far in that but didn't get it. And some of their feedback on specifically on that experience that I shared with them is that they didn't get it. Granted, they're not getting in the headset. They're watching a video of a playthrough, so it does not have the same effect.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I mean, you want to be able to show what that did. And I think that they didn't, they don't want their staff to feel they're going to be dealing with this exact same struggle. How do you showcase mental illness and bring someone in without distancing them? How do you create connection there, right? And I think my project created some distance for people, and so they just didn't get it. They thought, they didn't really get what I was trying to do, and that they thought that you needed context outside of the game, you needed to understand the whole short story and all of that in order to get it, and that it was about refugees. And it's okay, maybe it was too abstract, but I think a lot of it was they just didn't like that you just have this one path experience or whatever. Meanwhile, it's funny because they're going to be struggling with the very same thing, which is they're not even actually creating interaction in theirs. But anyways, I found myself being well, I don't want to create something like that again, because if people, if all I get is this kind of feedback where people don't like it, it's few and far between where people are yeah, that really made sense, and I get what you were trying to do with that or whatever.
Well, it's hard not to focus on you want some sort of embrace or positive engagement with what you're creating. Yeah,
that's such a good point. Yeah, it's actually it's such a good point because when you put that the headset on someone, you're okay, this is first big project, and I'm watching people go through it, and then it's I didn't actually think about the fact that it wasn't an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, it's not a positive experience.
Yeah, people just take off the headset. They're okay, thanks, and walk away. And I'm
they're internally scarred.
Yeah, right. This isn't fun for people,
Yeah.
But anyways, I think that this is inspiring me that I do think that it's really important that those types of stories are shared. And on any level, it's what we were talking about with horror. I mean, some people are going to want extreme, drop me in and make me uncomfortable and all of that stuff. And some people aren't. But
there is an audience for that full range of content.
Yeah.
Regardless of how disturbing it may be for some, there are others that just based off of their wide variety of life experiences across all humans, somebody might be interested in that thing. And just we were talking about in the kitchen earlier about how all of these different kinds of content, whether it was blogs or podcasts now, have basically become so ubiquitous that enables the most random person to have a very niche topic or sort of experience in the interactive context that they create. And there might not be that many people that actually give a shit about it. And there might be lots of people that it actually offends, but somebody out there is actually interested in that content. And I don't know if it necessarily makes sense that we should try to shut down too much experimentation on the edges, though. This whole conversation kind of brings me back to the beginning of where we started here in the room, which was talking about the rating system of different kinds of content in movies and then in interactive mediums like games. I would love to talk a little bit more on how those systems, those existing censorship or sort of categorization of the intensity or severity of content and the types of triggers that they will hold, how are those old systems ineffective when it comes to VR, and thinking through how we might be able to categorize that a little bit better when it comes to this very potentially intense medium.
Yeah, you reminded me. I feel like I want to look it up because I don't know exactly what it is.
That's fine.
But my friend told me about this website called Does the Dog Die? Do you guys know about this?
No.
But it is always the question when you have a dog in any movie or game or anything else.
I think that's
they're going to
what
kill
it
the
is.
dog to hurt
Yeah,
me.
so
I
it
know
is-
they're going to do it.
It is doesthedogdie.com.
Okay.
And it is a site people go to.
Yeah.
And it's not just, actually, they have a lot of different things in here. Animal abuse, addiction.
Oh my gosh.
Bones breaking, nuclear explosions.
Whoa.
And so it's a place that you go. And I
Wow.
think if you're thinking about seeing a movie.
Yeah.
You can check to see if your horror scenario is going to happen.
Yeah.
Like your particular triggers.
Yeah. We had a recent
Wow.
kind of traumatic situation because we went to see the second It movie.
Oh.
And I like I said, I like horror a lot.
Yeah.
And I like Stephen King. I had forgotten that in It, there was a scene where a gay person was murdered.
Oh.
And they really traumatically show that at the beginning of that movie.
wow.
And I don't feel bad spoiling that because I don't want people to go in like we
If
did.
that's something that's going to
Realizing.
trigger you.
It was
Don't.
really too real, too traumatizing, and
Yeah.
it made it really hard for us to enjoy the rest of the movie.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
when
You
I
just
think of
dwell on that.
it, is a very
Yeah.
spectacle kind of concept. I mean,
Yeah.
it's this clown that can turn into other kind of fantastical horror things.
Yeah.
And I know what he was trying to do, and I know why they thought they wanted it in the movie, but I do think that it was probably not appropriate to make it so intense because it was such real life horror.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times there's a technique in a lot of horror films to do things that intentionally make you feel extremely uncomfortable right at the beginning. Things that don't necessarily seem like part of the horror film. They're just to put you in a really bad state of being, so that you're unsettled and so that you're easier to put out of sorts. So they probably did it intentionally, but it's a lot.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I heard about this website from my friend, and I think
Okay.
it's a really good idea if there's things that you can't see and you
Right.
don't want to be
Yeah.
surprised by seeing them. And I think I'm half Japanese American, and I feel like I don't enjoy it when I'm watching a comedy show and there's like sudden racism,
Yeah.
like I would just want to there's obviously people in comedy are often pushing barriers.
It's all about pushing that comfort zone just enough where
Yeah.
you're uncomfortable but not so uncomfortable that it's no longer funny.
Yeah, and that's like a huge, raging topic, I'm
Yeah.
sure. But I think it's sad because I think a lot of people do have certain things that they don't want in their life because they have experienced them, and they want to know if they don't want to do some. It actually kind of comes back to the dissonance thing.
Yeah.
If you think you're getting with it. I think I'm
Ludonarrative
getting a
distance.
very supernatural kind of horror, and I knew there was going to be a domestic abuse scene because I remembered that, but I didn't remember the gay scene.
Okay.
And I just think it both of those were very intense in the movie. And I think the way they present the movie, if you've never read the book, is like there's a clown, you know. It's and people do.
Even as you're telling me this, I'm like, whoa! I had no clue that all of that stuff was in there.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things too is when people are designing. In general, when they're designing experiences too, they're coming from their particular frame and perspective, and so where that line is varies completely for the viewer. Varies completely based on their experience,
it's wholly subjective.
Yeah, and it's I think in general, there's that's a historically problematic thing where most of the stories are being told from a very limited perspective, and that limited perspective doesn't have those kind of triggers. Like it's generally white men telling the stories, and most of the stuff has come from that scenario, and so there's just like getting to the point where we understand that that's a real issue, like that it's really like there's not a diversity of stories, so there's not a diversity of understandings of those different triggers and those scenarios, and until we get it, there's gonna be a whole disconnect there that people don't get between the artist and the viewer. And you have to understand those things and think about them. But.
Yeah, which I think obviously just comes to having different types of people feel enabled to create and write and all of that. And I think within VR, we were talking a little bit about this earlier. There's this risk of, I mean, if the gaming, it's largely built off of the gaming industry, and the gaming industry was largely built off of particular people and rewarded for creating particular experiences. Yeah, and that means that these people have built up the confidence and the skill sets that translate very closely and directly to what's needed in VR. Yeah,
and just happen to be the perfect fit of expertise.
Right. And so we do have this opportunity where there's a new medium and you can kind of start over, you know, and try to involve more people. But the problem is that it's just like anything else in history. It's like a skill-based thing where all of the people with the right skills are coming from a particular industry that has a whole history. And it's like the same thing we see over and over again. There's no such thing as starting over.
But there's no such thing as in this kind of like transmission of previous media and influence and culture into the new technology. Because it's still people making it who were influenced by what came before, and they're carrying their old ideas into the new medium. So this idea of VR being a completely blank slate is kind of a misnomer. Like we're going to have to proactively work to actually discourage and shift the cultural direction of the industry moving forward. And then there's also the problem with it that it's touching so many other industries that we're going to take that sort of we're at risk of taking the toxic aspects of the game industry and then carrying them into all of these other contexts that we're bringing people into when we use these kinds of technologies and build experiences in VR.
And I think like championing just like this podcast is doing right now and like Miko's doing, like championing very specific experiences that are from other perspectives and doing a lot of work to get to not just help that person, but that helps anyone who's like an up and coming, coming out of school or even in school and like hearing what they could be doing. Like that's, even if they end up just doing that as a random off project at some point or even never do it, just the inspiration to know that you could carry that your perspective is invited and there are people who appreciate it and want it, just drive people, like get people to be able to come and share their thoughts and experiences, because that sense of belonging is massive problem and always has been in the game industry for anybody who is not fit into that dominant narrative.
I think that the best thing that we can do as an industry is really just continue to uplift and encourage people that are trying to create things that are unconventional or don't sort of fit into that typical industry category, or in those areas that are more easily adopted by any sort of investment or publishing capabilities. It's like any of these individuals that we've talked about for the last couple hours that basically went out on a limb and did something by themselves or independently pursued a project that was creating ludonarrative dissonance as a story element.
Nice use of the term.
Yeah. I did.
I hope you're going to
I learned a new word today, and I'm proud.
I want to hear a count of how many times we've said it in this episode.
Yeah, in the intro,
I'm
we
going to
need
make
to basically
Tam
be
listen
like,
to this one. He'll be like, ugh.
Just FYI, we used this word 7 times in this episode.
Yeah.
Look it up.
Yeah, but like it's just basically, I think we were talking about like just really encouraging more interesting development in people that are doing unconventional things.
But how do you encourage that? Because like the problem is we're all about talk, and I mean, what does that actually look like? Because to me, all I know is to help create awareness, right? So like one of the goals for this podcast, I want people to know that these types of experiences exist out there, or that when you are thinking of creating experiences or maybe thinking of buying experiences, that there are things out there. It's like telling people about a movie that moved you or a book that changed your life. If you don't tell people about it or make people aware, then they might just read like what's on the New York Times bestsellers or something, which isn't always the ones that are the ones that literally can change you as a human being, right? Or speak to your heart. And so for me, it's like more of an awareness thing. And I personally, I support people by like buying their games and support, money, or trying to help artists by like commissioning art or whatever it is. So there's like a money aspect. But I guess it's like there's those levels of like maybe there's somebody who has no money. Well, what do they do? And then with people who do have a lot of money and power, I think it's like pretty obvious. It's like, okay, hopefully they're, hiring people and guiding people and training them and all of that. But for a lot of the people that care about it, they might not have that power and that money. Well,
I feel like it depends just on like what any individual's abilities are. Because if you're somebody that has like a network, then that is the thing that you can share with people that don't necessarily have the money or resources to put together some sort of huge project. I think Kira in a previous episode was talking about how this whole culture in New York, where she was developing or creating a lot of these projects, there was a culture of just helping one another out and lending equipment and really trying to help upstarts happen, even if they didn't already have the means to do that. So like it's very early on in an industry like this, like that's just important that sort of mentality keeps on being ingrained in the culture. Yeah. Versus maybe like how Hollywood has gotten to this point, or the music industry and lots of other incumbents, that it's more competitive essentially once it reaches that sort of critical mass.
Yeah. Well, Mike, you work in a lot of stuff like this. I mean, you like are introducing me to things like little art studios that just like bring people in for free, that just like let them create art. You also care a lot about social impact, and you volunteer a lot. I mean, how do you feel like you are supporting this type of stuff?
I mean, I'm definitely, a large part of it is that I'm just simply taking skills that come from a life of privilege and access to those things, and then using those skills as a volunteer. Yeah. I think there's also, it's a super difficult problem to do any kind of significant size project, though, because the reality is it takes a lot of time and effort, and if you can't pay people to do that stuff in the way that our system is structured, it's very difficult to get it done. So I think that there are a lot of good, we've got a lot of crowdfunding type things these days, which is definitely an interesting way to democratize some of that stuff and push it out there. We've kind of lost a lot of the awesome part, which was we used to have a lot of publicly funded grants and a lot of arts grants and a lot of other things, and I feel like a lot of that has disappeared over the years. So there's a lot less of that to help push things that are in the public interest but not profitable.
Do you mean in general, or in the VR, like XR industry? Or?
No, I mean in general. I mean in the arts in general.
Yeah, okay.
I think that particularly in the United States, that there has just been declining support for that stuff. And it's been hugely negatively impactful to a lot of things that are really amazing for the public good, but aren't viable products in the same way.
Yeah, they're more, it's not as straightforward to quantify that sort of like business case or monetary impact.
Absolutely. I think that there's also just going out there and connecting with people and letting them know that there are opportunities to do things like recently I did that the iTech Inclusion Symposium thing where we just went and showed VR to a bunch of kids who are in schools that have underrepresented populations, and so they just seeing it and knowing that, hey, there's a career path here, there are things you could do, you could get into these kind of things. So being a person that's in that environment physically, like giving money is great, it helps with things, it does stuff, but it doesn't, ultimately it's not a real face and it's not a real point of connection, and you can't do anything. So like, when I've gone to these things and done these things, I give out my info and I let people contact me, and then I try to help them just make the connection and do those things. So and all of that's also rewarding. So that's part of the thing I think a lot of people don't understand is they don't, it's one thing to say that I'm volunteering to do this to help someone. It's also helping me every time I do those things. I think in general, if people understood that there is a huge sense of reward and connection and benefit that comes from that, like all of these things are helpful to all of us. We just have to actually spend the time and effort to get into it and take the step to do it. And then it's amazing, like, and it's super appreciated and very, very beneficial to everyone involved.
So much of it too is one-on-one, like small interactions. Like even with both of you, I mean, Mike, you took me to this like art studio literally last week, and it's like, oh, you can just come here and create art. And it was one of the most like diverse rooms I've ever seen in Seattle. Yeah. And it was amazing because people are just there. Studios. It's called Blue Cone Studios. And it's on what, like 11th? What is it?
Oh, I think it's 11th. Yeah, 11th between.
It's above Queer Bar in Seattle, and there's this thing called Tea Tuesdays or Tuesday Tea.
Tuesday Tea.
Okay, Tuesday Tea, and you can just like have. And anyone can go in and like just use the art supplies that are provided or bring their own and just like do whatever they want. And it's just like a good old time and everyone's squeezing in. Like it's a small place. And you just even showing me that was like me getting exposure to a whole part of Seattle and Capitol Hill that I don't have exposure to, which means exposure to people, exposure to ideas that like, oh, these people just come here to create art because it makes them feel better and they're sharing something with each other. And I come from like a business finance background. So that type of stuff is like really meaningful to me because I didn't come from a lot of exposure to that. And then Miko, like with you, your support just like, you know, emotionally about the project I was working on and showing me different examples of things that already exist. I mean, and the things that you've done, like with I mean, Code Romantic is like teaching. It's one of your games that teaches people to code, but also shows this like woman who's badass and falling in love, but also coding, and like it's this really unique experience. And the same with the hospice and everything else you do, and just like through what you do, it shows me. Like, I'm like, oh, I connect with that. I don't connect with so many other games, which is why I don't identify typically as a gamer. But it's like, I didn't know that those types of experiences existed.
Yeah. So Code Romantic is a visual novel we're making. And it's like, my idea was like, coding can be very intimidating, and a lot of people actually, what I was going to say even before you mentioned it was that like I think a lot of people shut doors for themselves before anyone else does.
There's a self-filtering effect.
Yeah, and even like meeting you and my friend Gisela, I realized that like I had never thought of myself like I could make a movie. And like, and I thought I'm a really like independent person. Like I make games, I write, I went to grad school, but I realized somewhere along the way, I just thought, oh, I could never make a movie and just shut that door closed.
Right.
And so why I wanted to make this game Code Romantic, which we're getting pretty close to shipping, is I think a lot of people just think coding is very intimidating and that they could never do it. And I saw a lot of programming games that are pretty awesome, but I think also people who are playing them already know how to code. And they're like, this is super fun. I'm going to like write an assembler or, you know, whatever.
Unless it's already intuitive.
Yeah, which is totally cool too. I'm excited about that as well.
But it's a different experience.
Yeah. So like we have sort of an outrageous idea, which is a post-apocalyptic love story that teaches you CS1. And yeah, when I started it, I was pretty nervous, and sometimes people would be like, "Who's gonna play that?" And then eventually, I was like, "Well, I wanted
Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly's gonna play it. Good. We need beta testers. So,
learn computer science in the post-apocalypse.
Yeah,
while falling in love.
I think what really like I realized was it was like the game I wanted when I was 12, when I started making websites, when I took my first C++ class, and everybody else was like a boy that was 16, and what I was really offensive that 12-year-old girl was in their like little summer class.
Oh, yeah, I like felt threatened by
and was like, she hasn't even done any coding before. It's like, yeah, I know. That's why I'm in this class.
Why I'm here.
I'm here.
Jeez. What a concept.
And then like, you know, just like going to school, and constantly feeling like I wasn't a very good programmer and telling myself that, almost the way that you keep saying, oh, I'm not really a gamer. I think we can tell ourselves these things and internalize them because other people act very confident and very arrogant sometimes. But then like in the end, I did end up getting my PhD in computer science. So that was like sort of my way of being like, hey, like those people who like made fun of me or called me stupid and to my face even and stuff like in school, like you don't get to define who I become, you know? So I think like, I just felt like it was a way to introduce a different group of people.
Right.
And I was like, hey, what if you liked reading this romance story so much that you would even learn how to code to find out what happens at the end?
That is
you
awesome.
know?
I think
that
it's
was my
genius.
idea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, right? It's going to release pretty soon.
Okay.
And it's very niche, but you know, we talked about that already. But I think I just like, to me, I just feel like I care so much about experiences that teach other people, like basically help others empower themselves.
Yeah.
Whether it's something like what you're talking about, like with the arts, like having a space where people can just come and do art. I think that's another case where a lot of people tell themselves,
I'm not an artist.
Or I'm not creative.
I'll never be good. I'm not creative.
It's almost everybody who comes to the door. I'm not an artist, and you're like, well, sit down and do some art and ignore that statement.
Yeah, like lift that filter
and
allow yourself to play a bit.
Yeah, and I think for VR, I think if people are listening to this and they're new to this whole space, the XR space, and they're just thinking like, I don't have the technical skills, or I don't have the like game design skills, or I don't have this, like, I mean, you don't have to do it all yourself, you know? Like, I think that's a really valuable lesson.
Yeah.
And it is hard. The technical boundaries are there and it is challenging, but I hope there are people that are interested in partnering with people that have unique perspectives and helping them be successful.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that like it is like all of it is difficult. It's challenging. It's very complicated information. You know, in the end, what you're doing is a pretty complicated thing.
It's a complex process.
It's a complex process, and there's a lot of different skills involved. But at the same time, every little bit of it is interesting, and all of it is interesting to learn. So, you know, most jobs are hard. They're just hard because they're arduous, or they're like you spend a lot of time doing something, or even they're mundane, like you're doing the same thing over and over and over. Like if you just take that same amount of time that you put into doing that job that's arduous or mundane or but not enjoyable to you, and spend your time and all of that time learning these things, each of those little steps, you'll learn it eventually, and then you have the skill. I think it's often easy to look at that end result and be like, oh, that's too complex, I can't ever do it. But if you just start from step after step, it eventually happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's just encouraging people to take the first step and actually start doing it. Like they'll quickly learn, oh, I just learned like 20 skills today and now I can do this new thing.
Yeah.
And then it's very quickly rewarding. And I think especially these days, because anyone can get all of the free tools. Like this was not, when I was growing up, there was no access to, you had to pirate anything if you wanted to get it, because it was like, oh, I'm going to pay $5,000 for this piece of 3D software. Now you can get free pretty much every single thing you need to make a game, including a VR product. And you can do that all yourself with a little group of friends for free, and build something and even get it published onto a platform without ever paying a single cent on any of the things you're working with. So it's just amazing how accessible it is. And there's YouTube videos for pretty much anything you could ever want to do.
Yeah.
So like, that's just crazy. That's a crazy world of access that we never had before.
It's also a lot easier to find other groups or like a community of people that are into that particular thing or tool set or whatever it is. Even if it's not like locally in the area that someone lives, it's like you can find communities online that exist. There's even like, if you wanted to start your own meetup, you use something.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you use that.
I have one.
And
I don't do a very good job of actually using it. But
Which one is yours?
I have one that's called Digital Artists of Seattle.
Okay.
Meetup.
Nice.
Well, I actually think that the meeting people part is hard.
It is.
Because I feel like I have a lot of ideas and I want a team of people to do those things with me, but I also don't want that team to be like people telling me I'm dumb and can't code. You know, like I want to
social
learn.
intimidation.
I'm very envious of the stories you hear of like like I just met someone helping coordinate for a film festival where I was helping and they were a filmmaker, and they are like, yeah, it's just so cool. Like me and all my friends, they happen to want to be a producer. I want to be a director. Like, and they build it all together. And like, you're totally right, Miko. You don't need to do it alone. In fact, it's just so much better to work with people. You're looking at years and years of challenge working solo. Like that guy, Lucas, whatever.
It's impressive when somebody can do that.
Super impressive. But yeah, it's really hard. And so you almost have to. And that's actually what attracts me to things like filmmaking and things like creating games because, or interactive experiences, because you literally cannot do it alone. You have to have a team of people. I mean, you can get creative with certain things to limit the amount of roles you need to produce a product. But I find that like I started going to hackathons, but the hackathons I got too intimidated. Like some people have really good experiences, but I felt like I was like being chosen for the softball team again and being picked last because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't know what I could offer. And if you're someone who, especially at the start of VR, it's like if you didn't know how to code, everyone was like, well, what's your use to me? If you can't draw and you can't code, like you're useless, you know? And so I think as you're trying to learn and figure these things out on your own, it can be hard to find people who have the time availability, who are willing to learn and work for free and like have the same ideas as you. So I don't know. I guess that's an interesting point in the sense that like even I'm just curious of like, okay, what are the best ways to meet people, you know? And I guess it is just like constantly putting yourself out there and just like going to hackathons or things like that, meetups, and you might like each one might be 0 people or 1 person, 1 potential. And it takes a while.
It's kind of a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
What you're saying. I mean, when you enter into a project with a team, it's sort of like a marriage,
right?
Yeah. Especially if you hope that you're
literally
gonna make
for
money.
you, Miko.
Yeah.
I know.
You're taking a bet together.
This is like he's heard this story so many times, so he won't be surprised I say this. But I mean, when I met my now husband, it was like, wow, he can dance. And he's a great programmer that's easy to work with.
That's a huge milestone.
And
right
that
there.
is an outlier.
And I was like, and then he like listened to me tell my like story ideas. So I was like, we're done here.
Yep, all good.
And it's not going to get any better than this.
Check that box.
But I mean, that's just for me, and everyone's different. But for me, I mean, I think what I wanted out of a relationship with somebody I could make things with, and that's what he wanted to
Collaborate with on.
You know, I think other people's relationships may be different, but you know, but let's say you're not going to, you know, marry the person that you're going to make a game or a VR project
Probably
with.
a small fraction there.
That's an edge case.
No, I think like you know, I was just talking to someone the other day who's a writer, and he wants to hire a comic book artist. He has a script, and he wants to hire an artist, and we were talking about it because you know, I was saying like, you know, if you're committed to this idea, so you do have to kind of almost like a prenup establish up front if the partnership
that
ends.
stuff's rough too.
Yeah.
Do you still own your IP and make that clear? You know, are they making any royalty on the comic book? Should it make money? Like all this stuff. And no one wants to think about that when you meet meet up and you're like, hey, maybe we could do something together.
Like, hey, you know,
It kills the buzz.
Yeah.
You're like,
in case this buzz ever ends.
I always
Talk
bring
about all
my
these
contracts,
logistics.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality of it.
Well, it is like
unfortunately.
dating. I mean, literally, because you're like, you can't just be like, all right, like, I mean, some people will do this, and if they're both on the same page, cool. But if you're just like going on, you know, like coffee meets bagel or whatever that stuff is, you meet them for the first time, and you're like, okay, do you want kids? What's your feeling on this? You know, like,
Jump straight into the
Here's the
deep into the
prenup
pool.
on my dating profile.
yeah.
I think it's a problem that you didn't feel invited at the hackathon or at a game jam, and that's too bad. But I do often I give advice to people that if there's someone that you're like, I think I could work with this person, doing a game jam or a hackathon or a film weekend.
It's a great way to check it out.
Yeah, because it's like you know what, your like 5-minute movie that you make this weekend's probably not going to be a smash hit, but I think you'll find out real quickly. Do you guys like working together?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's for sure. Actually, I've had
lot
that
more
happen.
important.
Yeah, where it was like good that we tested it that way. Because I was like, yeah, okay, never mind.
Nope.
Yeah,
that like pressure of success thing, and particularly just the nature of there have been a good number of examples of things that have blown up or done really well from a small product. And I think that it's like a lot of things, you get this weird thing in your brain, like every single one could do that. And it's hard because if you're trying to make your life of games, you're like, I really need all of them to do that. I want one of them to do that. And so you start really kind of jumping into this long-term success picture before you've even started making the thing. You're like, I don't know if it's going to be good or not.
Yeah, but for every idea too. Yeah. Like it's very difficult not to become emotionally invested in every single one of those possibilities turning into the ultimate dream for it. Which, I mean, that in itself stops so many people from even trying to make something happen.
Yeah.
Just the possibility of failing.
Right. I just had good advice from, once again, Tam. I feel like I'm dedicating this episode to Tam. I don't know if I should be like using his name. Like, I don't know if that's a bad thing. But I was talking to him about coding, and I have like all these ideas, and he's like, just take a really simple, like take one of the like original 2D games and recreate it.
Right.
And I was like, I don't know, I remember Pong, because, you know, I was like, that's the only thing. He's like, okay, like take that and then break that down into all of the various steps. And by the way, this is going to take you a long time. Like, you think this is a simple game. It's going to take you a really long time.
Seems
it's going
so
to
basic.
suck. You're going to build the whole thing and then realize you need to add something else and that you have to actually break the whole thing in order to add this thing and then redo it all. And he was just like talking me through this, and I'm like, man, like, I wish everyone did this for me on, like, you know, any project, because he's so right. And literally I'm on like this video that's like creating Pong in 20 minutes on YouTube, which is
20 minutes.
Yeah, like it takes him, but I'm like, you know, on minute 8, and it's taken me days because like everything broke from the start, you know, and it's just like,
you're watching a video called
but I'm watching a
Build
video.
Pong in 20
I thought
minutes.
you had your own Pong video, and I was like, dang, that escalated quick.
Anyways, then I created Pong in 20 minutes.
Did that help you then? Or, because I mean, that is interesting. Like, in some ways, he's framing it as this really difficult thing that you have, this mountain you have to tackle.
So
you know?
It's
interesting.
It does help me because, and I've actually noticed this. I wish I had another example, because it's happened to me a lot, and I thought about that right after I had this talk with him, because when somebody gives me everything, and this is just me personally, but when somebody gives me everything I'm up against, it's like suddenly that equips me. It's like when you finally write the project plan and you're like, okay, I can stop procrastinating and do it now. I understand everything that's going to suck right now. Like, I think procrastination is you're not writing down the things that are the blockers, and you're not writing down, you're just avoiding the thought, right? Because you think it's going to be so hard. But as soon as somebody's like, and I think for me, procrastination, and especially in this case of learning to code or struggling with that, is I'm afraid I'm going to fail. But if somebody's like, guaranteed you're going to fail, guaranteed, and these are the ways in which, and these are the ways in which you're going to fail, it makes me feel like, okay, when that happens, I was mentally prepared, and I'm not going to feel stupid that I'm not getting it. I can kind of laugh at it that here I am on this video of creating Pong in 20 minutes, and I'm on minute 1, and I just like literally fucked up like the file nomenclature so that I can't even like create my very first line of code. And I had to figure that out, you know, what I was doing wrong. And so it broke in like minute 1. And I think that because I had that talk, I was just like, okay, like this is what he told me.
It's the normalcy of it. Like, like humans have this great desire to feel like their experience is normal, and if they feel like they're too far outside of it, then they get dejected.
Exactly. Like if he hadn't told me that, and I just go in blind to saying, oh, I'm going to do this in 20 minutes, and that's what I expect, and it takes me 20 plus minutes to do minute 1, then so I think it was helpful. But Jay, you were saying something there too,
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's all about like how you had the situation framed psychologically going in.
Yeah.
He basically laid it out as like, no, you're not going to do this really basic thing in a relatively basic process and manner. It's not going to be easy, even though everyone else is going to say, oh, yeah, I've done that before. Or, oh, yeah, you can do this in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's going to take you 100 times longer than that or whatever. And if for you at least, knowing that ahead of time, you're like, I'm not intimidated by the fact that it is a huge task for me where I'm at right now. I am immediately discouraged when I run up against problems I didn't expect to have.
Yeah.
Based on how I perceived other people
were handling
that situation.
Yeah, and I also think that like all that ignored, I do think we like challenges as humans. And so if somebody's like, hey, this is how bad it's going to be, I mean, maybe I'm just speaking for myself. I have a total personality that if somebody tells me I can't do something, I do it. Yeah. And if I think I can't do something, I'm immediately like, damn it, I have to do it now. Right. And so I have to keep proving myself wrong. And so the more somebody tells me how hard it's going to be, I think I'm like, all right, sweet.
I think it's
sounds like a good
definitely
challenge.
one of the biggest complications is that I think, that's the reality. All humans are, we have a lot of variance of how we approach things and what makes us want to do something and not.
Yeah.
So I think it's that, like, I think a lot of people, when they're told they can't do something, may actually accept it. Like, it might be the opposite of that.
They're like, oh, that's
and I think some people, if they
advice.
see a giant task in front of them, are like, oh, I'm not even going to try to do that because it's way too complex and way too giant.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think
like tailoring that message is interesting. Like, some people may react one way, some may react the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you might actually be kind of special.
Yeah, you feel kind of unique in that way because I feel like most people
That's
don't want to know.
awesome. I mean, I think that should.
That's what my mom has always told me, that I'm very unique and special.
Well, she was right. I think like Mike's saying, there's another class of people that if they can't do it perfect, they're like embarrassed.
Oh yeah,
to have anyone see them in the process. And there's a great TED talk I like, and I often send this one to people too. Yeah. It's called like Bravery, Not Perfection, and it's because it is about like, hey, just because you're not going to be perfect the first time you do it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And it's more important that you tried and you'll do better the next time.
Not only that, if you want to be perfect, there's no way you'll get there unless you can't really get to perfect.
It's not perfect.
You're not going to even get close to perfect if you don't fail in the first place.
Right. And you hear that variations of that advice many times. And we even kind of just touched on that earlier, but like you kind of have to fail to succeed. Yep. And it's embarrassing to fail,
Super. Yeah.
I like the analogy of there was a art teacher who had two different, like basically split his class into two sections and had one try to make a perfect pot for the entire semester. And then the other side of the class tried to make as many pots as possible. And by the end of it, the ones that were just trying to do that repetition and kind of go through those iterations basically were making far superior pots than the side of the class that was trying to chase perfection the whole time, but never actually managed to make a successful pot by the end.
Yeah, I don't know if that story's real, but it's a very good example.
It's an anecdote that
is. It might be a real thing.
Surely some's tried it now.
Because it comes up so often. Well, you were saying earlier that like that is a certain class of people. Do you feel like you go through stages of that though? I feel like at least I relate to this. I feel like you definitely relate to this at different points of going through cycles of feeling you have this idea, but you're not ready to do it yet, or you don't know enough, or your proficiency isn't where it needs to be. You just don't have the means to make it happen the way that you see it in your mind yet. But then at some point you do, if you want to actually go forward with that, you have to accept where you're at that moment and just start taking steps.
Yeah, I've heard this talked about as meeting your own taste level. So whether it's like art or writing or making games or making experiences or coding, you have a taste level in all of these things. And one thing that can be really frustrating is like if you admire you have a really high bar for what makes a good movie. Yeah. And then you make your first movie.
And you're like, this is not like that at all.
You can tell, what's wrong. You just don't know how to fix it.
Yeah.
And it turns out that that's a really good thing because if you didn't have the taste, you'll never get there.
You wouldn't even know it was bad.
Right. You'd just be like proud that you did it. And that's cool too, right? But I mean, if you want to get better, then
I think most artists at the beginning, like when you first start doing art, you're in that state where you don't really understand necessarily the scope or the quality. Yeah. So you just do things because you enjoy them and you're not comparative, but we very quickly get past that.
It's like you eat the apple of knowledge and become aware of how different or bad subjectively what you're doing is, where it's not meeting the medium yet.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot about creating safe environments too, like kind of coming back to the topic of like, creating a better future in some ways and like starting with VR. Well, creating safe environments because that type of the taste, like having that taste and having to meet it, well, that's really encouraged in school, right? Like when we're younger, it's like you're not expected. It's like you are a freshman, you are level 1. We're all going to start here, and then we're all going to move to this level. And like there's some variation, but that is supposed to be a safe environment. And like you're submitting works to a teacher.
Yeah, you're allowed to not know things yet.
Yeah, and like, but the teacher is going to grade you, and that's your vulnerability. But it's like it's just the teacher. Sometimes students don't even, your peers don't even see what you did. And I know when I was getting into like filmmaking and writing and VR creation, I felt like so embarrassed it was like I was learning in front of everyone, and I still am, and I think it's a really hard thing to get over. It's like I had to force myself to put my work online as like a resume of sorts, but I'm like, this is like my freshman year project,
Right.
like why do I have to make this public?
Yeah.
And everyone's judging me based off of this. And I feel like it's just having like all of us creating a community of people, which is like, yo, that's totally fine. Like, Miko, I'll be the first person to watch your first movie that you create, because it's just like, it's like, I totally get that, and I feel like we should be able to create that kind of student safe atmosphere for each other when we're older, but we get stuck in like, now we're adults and now you're expected to have the skill sets and people get kind of angry. I think that's where that competition comes from, and what I encountered in some ways in like, hackathons and stuff. And I'm not like hating. I do like hackathons, but I just mean that culture comes from like, we are at this level and we're going to move in this level. If you're not here yet, like, what are you even doing in this industry? Right.
Yeah. Like there's an expected competency or mask of proficiency and expertise that you should show in a lot of communities.
But it's also like heavily leaning in only some of the disciplines. Like I feel like I have like hearing your story about that ignites like sort of like older pet peeves of mine. Like if you are a small studio or a small group of people, then you have to do more things. But when I think about like where your strengths lie, Kelly, I feel like if I had a multi-million-dollar company and I was going to hire you, I wouldn't hire you to code. Like I would hire you for what you're great at. And I would expect we could hire someone who's an excellent programmer that could implement your ideas. And I think that's really hard when you are kind of in this indie space, or you're in a kind of space that's not been proven to be hugely profitable or mainstream yet. Is that people say, well, if you want to do this, you better know how to code. You better, draw things yourself or whatever that may be. I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I think it's exciting that you want to code and that you're learning it. But I also think that like if you were to join a big team that was already funded, no one would expect that of you.
Totally. Right.
Like, you would hire someone who's already, that's their expertise.
Yeah, like that's the area that they dove deep on. That's their focus.
Right. Which kind of goes back to the community thing, because it's like, well, I do actually want to learn something about coding. And that's me personally. That's because it is such it's like I studied finance. I actually never wanted to work in finance, but I thought like this is a fundamental thing in the world and I want to understand how it works. And that's how I feel about coding.
Yeah, coding is definitely becoming it's ubiquitous, like everything you do.
The language of everything we interact with these days.
Right. And so in some ways, I never expect to be an expert, but I do want to know some things about it. And so you're totally right. I would never be expected. Like I would never get hired to be I would not want to be hired to do a coding job. But if I want to experiment with storytelling and game or interaction design within a VR experience, well, if I'm just doing that on the side, then I need somebody else to code for me. And that goes back to the community thing. Like I'm lucky to have also a partner who helps me create things, but we're not always going to be on like the same page, have the same amount of time or whatever it is. But yeah, it's like finding someone who's also interested and willing, it goes back to the partnership thing, which I think
collaborating.
takes time. Yeah.
Finding people that can fill in your strengths or your weaknesses.
Yeah. That weird inversion problem of like small indie groups needing multi-hat wearing people, like people with multiple skill sets.
Yeah.
That's a really weird, complex problem because on one side you're like, well, you can't get hired for the big giant company because you don't have the experience doing the thing. But then, you in the place where you do want to feel like you could get a job, you don't have the multiple skill sets that are needed to solve the problems. And but I think that it all depends a lot on whether there's this mentality that it's for the purpose of selling the product. Like if you're just doing something to have fun, people are a lot less concerned about a lot of those things, a lot about the like level of competency or skill set or things like that. If it's more for the purpose, and that's why hackathons, they tend to be more about the experience of doing it and less about the product that's generated. Yeah. And so I think that helps, that mentality helps for people who don't have necessarily a high-end skill set yet, but really want to participate and do things. But I also think, like you said, there's depending on which one you go to and where you are, and also if you aren't, if the reality is if you're not a white male, there's tendency also to make it even harder for you to get into those spaces. So I think that we need to create a scenario where people are a lot more invited into those environments, and maybe we have levels. Maybe there's like hackathons have a level of. I haven't actually done any, which is fascinating because that's the type of stuff I love to do, but I've never done them. Yeah. But I don't know if they do that, but if there were levels of like,
it would make sense. It's like
competency,
when you go to basketball camp, there are levels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So are there? For people who have done them, do they have those?
100%. Yeah, you go into a level, and actually, if you're performing a specific way that doesn't meet that level, you change. Meaning, you can advance.
Like a different
wait, are you talking about basketball? Or are you talking? Yeah, I'm talking
sorry.
Like in all sports ever, or like competitive sports, there are levels.
Does that. So do they do that at hackathons? I don't know. That's a good question.
The Bring That Series hackathon.
I just really wanted to share my basketball knowledge.
Make it relevant. Bring it. So yes, if you're not doing as well, you move to a different level.
Okay, but I've never seen that in a hackathon.
Miko, have you done many hackathon things?
I haven't done a hackathon. I've done a lot of game jams.
Oh yeah.
Both like in person and online. One of my favorite lesser known sources for game jams is itch.io, which is an indie game website that's really cool. And what's cool is the way that they do their UI and everything is anybody can start a game jam, and you just have the most wild ideas for game jams.
Crazy stuff.
They're so much fun. There was one I really liked. It was actually like it was called Paper Jam, and it's a like you write
make things.
You can only use a single sheet of printer paper. It's not a video game.
Wow.
And you have to basically you can make like a tabletop game, but all the rules are on it, and there's like pieces you can cut out off the bottom or whatever. But whatever you decide to do, you can only use one sheet of paper.
Oh, that's amazing.
And there's just fun like I don't know. There's just so many fun things that they do. And it's really cool because there's just so many. Like I'm sure if we checked right now, there'd be 20 game jams happening right now.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's just very I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is like because we've done some game jams, right? So we made stuff and shipped it and did stuff with it, but like. Because we always have so many projects, I haven't been doing so many now. Being like, oh, I should stop the thing I'm in the middle of to go to a hackathon.
I totally agree. It's like they're fun and great, but you have like a weekend where you're not getting any sleep, and you're just like, I'm already working on this project where like I'm doing all the things that I would accomplish or try to get gain out of the hackathon. Why would I spend my weekend? Like, I'd rather get some sleep and all of that. So I feel like I totally get that approach. I feel like anything else, there's like a time and a place for integrating them into your life. Yeah. It's like, I think you actually, Miko, were talking about like you go through phases of consumption versus production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
And I feel like
impressed how much you remember about me.
She's good at
that's an interesting idea because I've come back to that a number of times over the past few years. So what was the context of this conversation?
So it's just something that I've noticed is that like for myself, I will like have like a month where I read a lot of books and play a lot of games and watch a lot of movies, and I just like I don't create anything. I just like obsessively consume.
You're absorbing rather than producing.
And then suddenly
things.
all of that stuff like snaps into place and it like solves some design problem I had in a project. Yeah. And the next month I'll like barely read at all, but I'll just produce a lot of content. And so I don't know if that's common with other people.
I actually wish that was more common. Because I think that's like the problem you all have mentioned a couple times. Maybe before we actually got and started recording, but the there's a really common problem in the game industry in particular where there's just not a lot of inputs a lot of times. Like people tend to recycle things, or they just live on existing like intellectual properties or existing mechanics or everything else. And
there's a lot of like build.
You never get anything new. Whereas if you go and look at other sources and pull in information, that's how you build new ideas and come up with new things. So.
It's like adding some fuel to the potential creative energy that you can produce things from.
Yep.
I keep on coming across this over the past year, especially since beginning of 2018. I went to a software development bootcamp. So it was just this rapid sort of experience of gaining that whole new skill set and learning how to think programmatically, and adding all of that expertise in onto what I really didn't have as like a software related skill set before. But ever since then, I've been thinking of that particular cycle where you absorb a ton of content and you're not actually building a whole lot. You're just kind of letting it marinate in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then you periodically, if you have that kind of energy, you have to express it back out somehow. It started to evoke this analogy in my head that is really basic. It's just imagine that you have a sort of plate of waffles or pancakes.
I love waffles. I love where this is going.
So yeah, you just imagine a nice like hot plate, and you just slapped some fresh, steaming, delicious crepes, waffles, pancakes on there. It's all buttery and delicious. And like that is really the metaphorical equivalent to a new set of ideas or an awesome conversation that you had, or a movie that you watched, or book, or whatever. It's just some new domain of thinking and inspiration. And the plate is your mind. It's where all of that influence gets stored. And over time, if you're stacking a bunch of those pancakes or whatever onto this plate, there is a point where you really have to start consuming it and digesting it and actually doing something with it, and kind of letting it back out into the environment around you or into whatever you're building. It often feels like a good way to describe what happens when I have exposed myself to too much influence. After a while, you start to kind of get overwhelmed. You've had too many conversations, or in the tech industry here in Seattle, it's like you've been going to so many meetups and having so many conversations that you start to realize, oh my gosh, I'm just overwhelmed by ideas and new topics and things. And I realize I haven't even done anything interesting with any of this for the last couple months.
Yeah.
I need to stop absorbing so much and actually take time to digest.
It's like your plate of waffles is toppling over.
Yeah, there's just
and
too tall to stack.
Sit down, put some butter on that shit.
And now, why y'all are killing me? I just want to eat waffles now.
I know. Sorry. I know.
Sorry, we didn't make breakfast.
Oh, we should have.
Next time you gotta keep waffles in the fridge.
Yeah.
But it's like you were talking about. It's like your mental queue gets empty after a while, after you've been outputting a lot of material and you've been getting creative for a while and building things, and you're like, I just need to absorb. I just need to like build up a new stack for a while and marinate for a bit.
Yeah. I'll take that analogy one step further. It's like at some point you got to be like, you're just working with egos. And then at some point you got to be like, you have to be exposed to something like a Belgian waffle or like some other type of thing.
Yeah.
But you need to like stop and I mean, I know this is like butchering this analogy, but like get out there and try out all these other waffles to be like, how can I
throwing the shade at Eggo.
We are not getting corporate sponsorship.
Hey,
Like
I
Eggo
love
just
Eggo.
saying.
Actually,
There is a time and place for
Backpedal.
Eggo blueberry waffle.
No, this is not a backpedal. This is aggressive defense.
Forward progress.
Yeah, I actually love Eggos, and I always have either Eggos or any type of like frozen waffle. Sometimes I get like the multigrain. I eat them a lot. But I still appreciate once in a while, a different waffle, or you need to, or like somebody else is going to appreciate Belgian waffle more than Eggo. I don't know who. Fuck those people. No, I'm kidding.
Clearly,
I made myself into trouble
game.
either way. I just want everyone to know that I'm not. I'm not against actually like any waffles. I've never had a bad waffle.
I have had a bad waffle.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Freezer burn.
Oh,
Bad
it was
waffles.
just sitting in there too much.
Don't do
Sounds
it.
like you didn't put enough butter and syrup on it,
Probably
because
true.
it's kind of like, how can you even taste it?
Maybe that's like the idea or conversation that you like take a small bite and you're like, ugh, this isn't worth it. And then you're like, I'm not gonna take the time to ingest that. Have you ever had Liege waffles before?
No.
They're like the original, like actual Belgian waffles.
It sounds
They're
familiar.
very thin.
They're not super thin. They're actually you basically take a different kind of batter, which you would normally use for kind of a brioche bread. So it becomes a lot more fibrous and chewy. And you put so you're like putting
My
this.
stomach is like growling.
I know, we're going to have that in the audio.
So you take this like lump of nice, like chewy, more fibrous, like thicker dough, put it into the waffle iron after kneading in little pearls of like cane sugar and things in there.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Pearls, you
pearls. That like they're like chunks of this raw sugar, and you kind of knead it into there and get it nice and evenly distributed. And then put it in your waffle iron, crush it down, and you end up with this waffle that is nice and fibrous and chewy on the inside and
Fibrous is not a
crisp.
word I want my waffles.
Well, just
I know
go
what
for
he's
it.
saying, though. I'm okay with it. I'll allow it.
It's like you can like tear it apart, and it doesn't just rip on seams or anything. It's like it's got some actual like meat to it,
Bread quality.
and it also has those little chunks of melted sugar that end up melting around the outside of the waffle as well. So you get a coating, like a crisp sort of outer shell, and like a steamy, delicious
waffle
inside.
game right there.
Yeah,
Jay, you should do an
dust
entire
this-
podcast just describing.
Yeah. The waffle podcast.
Waffle
It's like
cast.
describing
Waffle
food.
cast.
waffle cast. Oh gosh.
Oh god. Anyways.
Yeah, so they're delicious. You don't need
Speaking of
syrup for
waffles,
anything.
I'm just kidding.
Wait.
I'm not going
Whoa.
anywhere with that. No.
Yeah, that's good.
But okay, so because we have so much to talk about, so little time.
Now that we've waffled for a bit.
Flipping this to the other side, because I feel like we're talking a lot about working in the industry, but
Mm-hmm.
you guys create shit that people, and you also consume stuff. All of what we're talking about, production and consumption.
Yep.
I guess like going off of the theme of kind of bringing stuff to the masses and like creating this whole industry from scratch. What are the types of experiences that you guys really like and want to see? Like some of your kind of dream ideas of what can be done with VR and what can be done with this kind of empathy that we're talking about balancing.
Like things you would want to see more experimentation and exploring. of
Right. Oh,
moving
and if you
forward.
can work it in, Mike, I had a pin that I never got to get back to, and I wanted to hear so much about it, which was how you like books, like the empathy in books. You think that's stronger
Oh,
than
right,
anything.
right,
So
right.
see
Yes.
if you can like fold that into the waffle of your
your stack of
thoughts.
waffles.
Yeah.
I have a very good way to do that,
Oh
actually.
yes. Oh, I'm so happy. All right. Hope you enjoyed part 1 of the Miko Mike show, or Miko.
The Miko Meek show.
But yeah, so that's part 1. We have part 2 coming up next. But for now, we'll give you some info on how to follow our lovely guests. And so you can follow Miko on Twitter and or Twitch at Dr. Mikachu. That is DR. Best name ever. DRMIKACHU. And also you can check out her company Drifter. So I will plug this, and we talk about it in part 2 as well. So Drifter is the current VR game company she works for, and they have a new game that is coming out now. She mentions it back when we recorded, and it's actually coming out very soon.
I know,
so
this
it's
is
called
awesome.
Lies Beneath, and I'll do the little like what they say on the website. It says, Lies Beneath is a single-player survival horror game with a heavy dose of action. Something's gone horribly wrong in the sleepy town of Slumber, Alaska. Now, returning college student May must fight to save her father and her sanity from the terrifying townsfolk and creepy creatures infecting her hometown. How did I do? You would do a better job. That's we'll have
amazing.
Jade. We'll have Jade read that same thing
for
in
the
the
next
outro
one.
for the next one. But so that game called Lies Beneath again, and you can go to driftervr.com to check out more. There's also we link to that plus a YouTube video in our show notes. More on that game, and that comes out on Quest March 31st, and on the Rift April 14th. So you and all your quarantined friends can play a horror game that's home. Because we need more horror than what's already happening in our real lives right now.
Yes, that's all.
I actually can't wait. So I actually, side note, think that we should videotape me playing that game, because I think most of my friends know that I am the worst with horror experiences.
We should jump on like Twitch or stream from VR.
Yeah.
Actually.
So we'll do something like that. We'll keep you posted.
Yep. There are things in the works.
What else, Jay?
So Mike, you can find him at www.luminousmachine.com. That is spelled the way that you would think, luminous and then machine.
We link to it in our show notes too.
Yep. You'll be able to find it there. That was really the only thing that he wanted to highlight. Yeah,
you can find his social accounts there. He said he talks about more VR stuff on Facebook if you want to try and connect with him on Facebook. And on his other social accounts, he talks about other things. But as we mentioned in the intro, he's like big. He's a great person to follow to like get inspired to volunteer.
Go find the things that he's made and worked on as well. Yeah, they're just awesome.
Yeah,
really interesting.
Always working on cool projects.
Yeah. Then you can follow us, of course, as always, on realityquestpodcast.com. You can send us email there. We share links to multiple different platforms that our podcast is listed on. And we also have links to our Ko-Fi or Coffee and Patreon accounts, where if you would like to support all of the awesome things that we enjoy doing and sharing with you, you can go there and do so. We are also on Instagram at RealityQuest Podcast and Twitter at reality_quest.
That's where you can see all of Jay's amazing art he does.
Also on the website. But.
Right. Well, yeah. On all of those places, you can check out, for every episode, Jay painstakingly creates.
I mean, it has definitely been a learning process for sure.
But it's cool. I get to look forward to it every time. The deal that Jay and I have is that I do the editing so far, and he does the art, and
the
we're
write-up.
A great team, right? And
the episode write-up.
Yeah, the episode write-up. That's right. So you can check out all of Jay's amazing his narrative and his narrative skills and his
narrative prowess.
And his art skills.
Oh gosh. Well,
yeah, and actually, you should follow us, because we are brewing up some ideas about doing like meetups in VR, and also things like streaming me playing horror games. And so
I've been really pushing Kelly on this live streaming.
I know
for
Jay's
a while
always
now.
just really pushing me into my discomfort zone. But
I mean,
it's
I'm
all
uncomfortable
good.
with it too, but I think that's why we should.
That's what Jay and
do
I
it.
are all about, because this whole thing is uncomfortable for us.
Yes.
So you should follow us on all those things, because then you'll get updates on what we're doing, like some links to those and when to join those things.
Yeah. So if you enjoy being uncomfortable with us as well, you should stick around, because part 2 of our episode with Miko and Mike is coming up next.